If you're enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Frank Miller. I've been a ranger at Olympic National Park for 20 years now. Seen a lot of things in these woods, but nothing like what happened last summer. It started on a Thursday morning in July. I woke up to the soft sound of rain tapping on my cabin roof. That sound usually makes me feel at peace, but something felt different that day. I got out of bed and looked through my window. The mist was dancing between the huge old pines. These trees have been here longer than any of us, some for hundreds of years. In the early morning light, their dark shapes looked like giants standing guard. The air felt extra crisp that morning when I stepped onto my porch with my coffee. Something wasn't right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but after so many years in these woods, you develop a sense for these things. Birds were singing in the trees above me, robins, chickadees, and jays. Their songs echoed through the forest. Then suddenly they stopped. All at once, the silence hit me like a punch. In all my years here, I'd never heard the forest go quiet so fast. I stood perfectly still, coffee mug halfway to my lips. That's when I saw them. A family of deer running past my cabin. Not the gentle trot they usually do when moving from one feeding spot to another. No, they were full-on sprinting, eyes wide open. Something had scared them bad. Just as I was about to go inside and grab my gear, my radio crackled to life. "Ranger Miller, come in. Over." It was Martinez from the ranger station. "Miller here. Over. We've got another missing persons report. Group of backpackers didn't check in last night. Last known location was the northern quadrant around Misty. Ridge Trail. Third one this month." My stomach tightened. "I'm on it. Heading out now. Over." I went back inside to pack my gear. My German Shepherd, Rex, was usually excited about trail days. Not today. He backed away when I reached for his leash, tucking his tail between his legs. He sat by the fireplace and let out a low whine. "What's wrong, boy?" I asked, kneeling next to him. Rex just whined louder and wouldn't budge. In 12 years, he'd never refused to come with me. I had to leave him behind. As I headed up the trail, the rain got heavier. The path was steep, winding through massive trees that blocked most of the sky. I noticed something strange about a mile in. Broken branches hanging at odd angles along the trail. Not the clean breaks you'd see if they were snapped by wind or fallen naturally. These looked twisted, like something had pulled and torn them with great force. The rain soaked through my jacket as I climbed higher. Something was waiting for me up there. I could feel it. And for the first time in years, that feeling wasn't just concern or duty. It was fear. I kept climbing the trail, my boots squishing in the mud. The rain made everything slippery. After about 2 hours of hiking, I reached the area where the backpackers were last seen. What I found made my heart sink. There was a campsite, but it looked like it had been hit by a tornado. The tent was ripped to shreds. Sleeping bags lay scattered between the trees. A backpack hung from a branch as if someone had thrown it up there in a hurry. I pulled out my notebook and started writing things down. That's when I noticed something strange. The campfire still had warm embers, and next to it was a half-eaten sandwich. Not cold, not even soggy from the rain. It was still fresh. "Hello?" I called out. "Park Ranger, anyone here?" My voice just bounced back at me from the trees. No answer. I knelt down to look at the ground around the campsite. That's when I saw them. Footprints in the mud. But these weren't normal hiking boot prints. They looked almost like bare human feet, but wrong. They were too long, with marks at the ends that looked like claws? A chill ran down my back that had nothing to do with the rain. I'd tracked bears, cougars, and all kinds of wildlife, but I'd never seen prints like these. I decided to follow them. The tracks led away from the camp, heading deeper into the parts of the forest that aren't on the regular hiking maps. As I walked, the trees got thicker and older. This was old-growth forest, trees that had been standing since before anyone had even named this place Olympic National Park. Suddenly, a thick fog rolled in. It wasn't the normal morning mist that hangs around until the sun burns it off. This fog appeared in seconds, thick as a wall. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me, and it was cold, much colder than it should be in July. I pulled my jacket tighter and felt for the hunting knife on my belt. The knife was a gift from my father. He used to be a ranger here too until he disappeared in these same woods back in 1954. I was just a kid then. They never found him. I pulled out the photo I always keep in my pocket. My daughter, Sarah. She hasn't spoken to me since her mom died 3 years ago. She blames me for not being there enough when her mother was sick. Maybe she's right. I put the photo away and rubbed my face. The wrinkles under my fingers reminded me I wasn't young anymore. At 52, I've spent more of my life in these woods than out of them. I thought I knew every tree, every trail, every sound this forest could make. I was wrong. Standing there in that unnatural fog, listening to the silence where there should have been birds and insects and the rustle of small animals, I realized there were things in these woods I didn't understand at all, and whatever took those backpackers, it was still out there, watching, waiting. I gripped my knife tighter and pressed forward into the fog. I'd been walking in the fog for about 20 minutes when I heard something move behind me. I spun around, hand on my knife. "Who's there?" I called out. "Don't shoot," a woman's voice answered. "I'm a researcher." A figure stepped out of the mist. She was in her early 30s, wearing a waterproof jacket with a backpack full of scientific equipment. Her dark hair was tied back in a ponytail, and she carried a small device in her hand that looked like a fancy tape recorder. "Dr. Elaine Warner," she said, showing me an ID card. "I'm a wildlife biologist from the University of Washington." "Ranger Frank Miller," I replied, relaxing a little but still on edge. "What are you doing out here? This area isn't on the regular." "Trails." She hesitated before answering. "I'm tracking unusual wildlife patterns. Several species have been behaving strangely in this region over the past few months." "Like the deer running in terror this morning?" I asked. She nodded. "Exactly. Animals are fleeing this area. Birds, deer, even the insects. Something's scaring them away." I looked at the device in her hand. "What's that for?" "It records sounds we can't hear. Very low frequencies that animals can detect, but humans can't." Something was off about her story. University researchers usually check in at the ranger station before heading into remote areas. "Can I see your field notes?" I asked. "I need to know what I'm dealing with. I've got missing hikers to find." She reluctantly handed me her notebook. As I flipped through the pages, my blood ran cold. Mixed in with scientific observations were detailed sketches of a creature I'd only heard about in stories. Tall, skeletal, with a deer-like head but standing on 2 legs. The local tribes called it the Wendigo. "What exactly are you tracking, Dr. Warner?" I asked quietly. She took a deep breath. "Something that shouldn't exist, Ranger Miller. I was skeptical too, until 3 weeks ago when I recorded sounds that no known animal makes. Then I found tracks just like the ones you were, following." "How do you know I was following tracks?" "Because I've been following you for the last hour. I wanted to make sure you weren't, well, someone else." "Someone else?" "There's a reason I didn't check in at the ranger station," she said. 2 government research stations have been secretly set up in the northern quadrant. They've recorded infrasound frequencies that don't occur in nature. They're studying whatever this thing is, but they're keeping it quiet." I felt a slight tremble in my hands, something that hadn't happened since Vietnam. The familiar feeling of being in danger but not knowing where the threat was coming from. "Those missing hikers," Warner continued, lowering her voice. They're not the first. This has been happening for decades. Your rangers find some, call it animal attacks or exposure. But the ones that go missing in this part of the forest, they're never found. I thought of my father. Was this what happened to him? The fog seemed to press in closer around us. Neither of us said it out loud, but I could see in Warner's eyes she felt the same thing I did. We weren't alone. Something ancient was in these woods. Something watching us right now. We need to keep moving, I whispered. It's not safe to stay in one place. As if in answer, a sound echoed through the canyon in the distance. It wasn't a wolf. It wasn't a cougar. It wasn't any animal I'd ever heard in 20 years as a ranger. It was a howl that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Deep, guttural, and somehow hungry. Dr. Warner's face went pale. "It knows we're here," she whispered. We pushed forward through the fog, trying to keep track of where we were. But something weird was happening to our equipment. My compass needle spun in circles, not pointing north anymore. Dr. Warner's GPS showed impossible numbers, claiming we were somehow both below sea level and 20,000 feet up at the same time. "Have you ever seen anything like this before?" I asked her. She shook her head. "Never. It's like the laws of physics don't fully apply here." As we walked, I noticed claw marks on the trees. Not low down where a bear might scratch, but 15 feet up the trunk. Whatever made them had to be tall. Really tall. Then the smell hit us. It was like roadkill that had been sitting in the sun for days, mixed with something sickly sweet that made my stomach turn. Dr. Warner covered her nose with her sleeve. "What is that?" she whispered. I was about to answer when I spotted something hanging from a tree branch. A backpack. I recognized the bright red color. It belonged to one of the missing hikers, a college kid named Jason. I'd seen his photo when his friends reported him missing. I reached up and took it down. The fabric was shredded, like it had been torn, by powerful claws. And there were stains all over it. Not red like blood, but black, thick, and oily. "Is that?" Dr. Warner began. "I don't know." I cut her off. "I've never seen anything like it." She took out a small vial and scraped some of the black stuff into it. "I'll analyze this later, if we get out of here." If, not when. The radio on my belt suddenly crackled to life, making us both jump. Through the static, I could hear voices, but they sounded wrong, distorted and backwards, like a tape playing in reverse. Then I heard something that made my skin crawl. My name. Miller. Come. Find. Miller. I switched the radio off. Dr. Warner stared at me, eyes wide. "That wasn't your ranger station," she said. No, it wasn't. The temperature was dropping fast. Within minutes, our breath was making clouds in the air. It had been a warm July day just hours ago, but now frost was forming on the leaves around us. Dr. Warner checked her thermometer. "It's 28 degrees, she said in disbelief. "That's impossible." She pulled out her recording device and held it up. The little screen showed sound waves, picking up frequencies too low for us to hear. "There's something here," she whispered, something giving off powerful infrasound. She pressed a button, and the device played back what it had recorded, but shifted up so we could hear it. My stomach dropped. The low rumbling sound, when played back, had patterns in it, patterns that sounded like words. Find. Hungry. Soon. I shut it off. "We need to keep moving." We climbed higher, following a ridge that should have led us back to a known trail. That's when we found it. A deer hanging in the branches of a tall pine, at least 20 feet up. Its body was split open, organs removed with clean, precise cuts. Not the messy work of a predator feeding. This was different. Methodical. "That's not an animal kill," Dr. Warner said, taking photos with her camera. "It's too precise." The forest around us was completely silent now. No wind, no birds, no insects, nothing. But in that silence, we both heard it. Whispering. so faint. It might have been in our own heads. Words just at the edge of understanding, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Dr. Warner's face went white. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The whispers seemed to be calling my name, over and over. And they sounded like voices I knew. People from the ranger station, the missing hikers, and worst of all, my father's voice, just as I remembered it from when I was a boy. The fog shifted. Suddenly, and through a gap in the mist, I saw something that turned my blood to ice. About 50 yards away, standing between two massive pines, was a figure. Tall, much taller than any human. It stood on two legs but was thin, so thin it looked like skin stretched over a skeleton. And its eyes glowed in the mist, fixed right on us. I blinked, and it was gone. The gap in the fog closed. "Did you?" I started. "Yes," Dr. Warner said, her voice shaking. "I saw it too." We stood frozen, staring at the spot where the creature had been. "What was that?" I whispered. "I think you know," Dr. Warner replied. "The Wendigo. Native tribes in this region have stories about it going back centuries." We started moving again, faster now, no longer following tracks, but just trying to find our way out. That's when we saw it again, moving between trees with impossible speed. 1 second it was 100 yards to our left, the next it was the same distance to our right. It moved on two legs, but sometimes dropped to all fours like an animal. The way its joints bent was all wrong, like they could twist in any direction. I pulled out my gun and fired a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed through the trees. Then the echo came back. Exactly the same sound. But it wasn't an echo. It was the creature, copying the gunshot perfectly. "It's mimicking you," Dr. Warner said, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned on her recording device again. The creature's voice came through the speaker, but this time it was talking. Really talking. Using the voices of different people. "Help me. Please help," said a young man's voice. Probably one of the missing hikers. "Anyone out there? We're lost," said another voice. Then came a voice that made my heart stop. A woman's voice, soft and familiar. "Frank? Frank, why didn't you come home that night? I needed you." My wife's voice. My dead wife's voice. "Turn it off," I said roughly. Dr. Warner clicked the device off, her hands shaking. "It's using psychological warfare," she said. "It knows things, Miller. Things about us." I shined my flashlight at a big pine tree nearby. Nothing unusual about it. I looked away for a second, and when I looked back, deep claw marks ran down its trunk. Marks that hadn't been there a moment before. "Did you see?" I began. Warner nodded. "It's like it can change things around us. Maybe even manipulate time in small areas." "How is that possible?" "I don't know, but I have a theory. What if it's not just a creature? What if it's somehow connected to this place? Part of the forest itself?" The fog was getting thicker, but it wasn't moving naturally. It seemed to be herding us, pushing us in a specific direction, toward a rocky cliff face I could just make out ahead. "I think it's driving us somewhere," I said. We tried to turn to head in another direction, but the fog was so thick in every other direction that we could barely see our hands in front of our faces. We had no choice but to go where it wanted us to go. As we got closer to the cliff, I saw a dark opening, a cave, not marked on any park maps I'd ever studied. "I don't like this," Warner said. "It's trapping us." We turned to go back, but the creature was there, standing on the path behind us. In the clearest view yet, I could see its awful form. Tall and skeletal, its skin gray and stretched tight. Its head was like a deer skull, but wrong, with many points on its antlers and eyes that glowed with an unnatural blue light. It didn't attack. It just watched us, its head tilted to one side like it was curious, studying us. We backed away toward a ravine to our right, hoping to find another path. The creature let us go, but we could see it following along the ridge above us, always keeping us in sight. "It's playing with us," Dr. Warner whispered, "like a cat with mice." The temperature kept dropping. Our breath fogged in the air and frost crunched under our boots. It had to be below 20 degrees now. Impossible for July in Washington state, even in the mountains. "We need shelter," I said, my teeth chattering. "We'll freeze to death out here." "That's what it wants," Warner replied. "To weaken us. Make us desperate." I looked up at the ridge where the creature walked. It was patient. So patient. Like it had all the time in the world. Because it did. This was its home. Its hunting ground. And we were just the latest prey it had lured into its trap. But I wasn't going to die in these woods like my father did. And I wasn't going to let more hikers vanish without a trace. It was time to stop running. Time to fight back. "I have an idea," I said to Warner. "There's an old fire lookout tower about a mile from here. If we can reach it, we might have a chance." "Chance at what?" she asked. "A chance to end this, once and for all." We made our way toward the old fire tower, fighting through the cold and the thick fog. I explained my plan to Dr. Warner as we walked. "The tower has emergency supplies," I said, "including flares and fuel for the generator. If we can lure the creature inside, maybe we can trap it, or at least hurt it enough to drive it away." Warner nodded, but her eyes were full of doubt. "Do you really think fire will stop it? The legends say Wendigos are incredibly hard to kill." "Got any better ideas?" I asked. She didn't. As we climbed the ridge toward the tower, snow began to fall. Not the light, dusty kind, but a full-on blizzard appearing out of nowhere. The wind howled, driving icy particles into our faces. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. "Stay close," I shouted to Warner over the wind. I reached back and grabbed her hand, but her hand wasn't there. "Warner!" I spun around. Nothing but white. "Warner!" I heard her scream, but it sounded far away, muffled by the sudden storm. Then her voice cut off mid-scream. The silence that followed was worse than the scream itself. "Warner!" I yelled again, pushing back against the wind, trying to find her. But it was useless. She was gone. I found her backpack a few minutes later, lying in the snow. Next to it was her recording equipment still running. But there was no body, just a trail of frozen drops of blood leading up the hillside. I picked up her backpack and kept moving. I had to reach the tower. It was my only chance now. After what felt like hours fighting through the storm, I finally saw it. The old wooden fire lookout tower standing on the peak ahead. It was built in the 1940s and hadn't been used in years, but it was still solid. A square building on top of tall wooden legs with windows facing all directions so rangers could spot forest fires miles away. I climbed the icy steps, my hands numb with cold. Inside, it was bare but dry. There was an old desk, some chairs, a wood stove, and a cabinet full of emergency supplies. Just as I'd hoped, there were flares, matches, and 2 jerry cans of fuel for the generator. I worked quickly, setting up my trap. I poured fuel around the base of the wooden support beams, then set up flares that I could trigger with a single match. The plan was simple. Get the creature to follow me up into the tower, then light the flares. The tower would catch fire, and we'd both go down with it if necessary. But I didn't plan to die. There was a maintenance ladder on the far side. If I timed it right, I could light the flares and escape down the ladder while the creature burned. All I had to do was get it. To follow me up here, I didn't have to wait long. Standing at the window, I saw it emerge from the trees below. The Wendigo. In the clear winter light, I could see every horrible detail. Its skin was tight over its bones like a starving animal. Its fingers ended in long claws that dragged in the snow, and around its neck hung trophies. Watches, necklaces, pieces of clothing. With a jolt, I recognized one of them, a pocket watch on a silver chain. My father's watch, the one he was wearing the day he disappeared. The creature looked up at me in the tower window. It knew I was there, It had known all along where I was going, and then it started to climb. Its movements were jerky but fast as it scaled the tower. I could hear the wood creaking under its weight. I stood in the center of the room, gun in one hand, matches in the other. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. The trap was set. All I had to do was wait. The scratching sound came from directly below the trap door in the floor. Then the door burst open and the creature pulled itself up into the room. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its mouth opened to reveal rows of sharp teeth. And the smell, like death and decay, and something ancient and evil. It lunged at me. I fired my gun, the shots deafening in the small space. The bullets hit it, but they seemed to pass right through without doing much damage. It kept coming. We struggled, its claws slashing at me. Pain exploded in my left hand as two of my fingers were bitten clean off. Blood sprayed across the floor. With my good hand, I struck a match and threw it. The flares ignited, and fire raced along the fuel trails I'd laid. The creature shrieked, a sound like metal being torn apart. The fire spread quickly, engulfing the wooden floor and climbing up the walls. Smoke filled the small room. The Wendigo thrashed wildly, caught in the flames. I saw my chance and took it, diving for the maintenance ladder. But as I reached it, the floor gave way beneath us. We both fell through burning wood, plummeting toward the ground below. I hit the snow hard, the breath knocked out of me. Everything hurt. Through the pain and smoke, I saw the Wendigo land not far from me. It was burning, its body twisted and broken from the fall. But it wasn't dead. As I watched, unable to move, it dragged itself into the trees, leaving a trail of black fluid in the snow. Its glowing eyes fixed on me one last time. A look of hatred, but also something like respect. Then it was gone, swallowed by the forest and the snow. 6 months later, I was back on duty at Olympic National Park. My left hand was different. Now, 2 fingers replaced with metal and plastic. The doctors called it a partial prosthetic. I called it a reminder. The official report said the fire at the lookout tower was caused by lightning. Dr. Warner was listed as missing, presumed dead. The backpackers were never found. No one believed my story about what really happened. Not the other rangers, not the police, not even my daughter when I finally called her. But she did agree to meet for coffee next week. It's a start. Winter is coming again. The air's getting colder and the days shorter. Sometimes at night I stand on my cabin porch and watch the tree line, waiting, wondering, because I know the truth. The Wendigo is still out there, healing, growing stronger, and someday it will return to these whispering pines. I'll be ready when it does. My name is Howard Patterson. I've been a ranger at Carlsbad Caverns National Park for almost 12 years now. Before that, I was a geologist until, well, that's a story for later. The morning everything changed started like any other. The sun was just coming up over the desert, painting the sky orange and pink. Little dust devils, those small swirling winds that pick up dirt, danced across the dry ground as I started my morning patrol. I remember checking my watch. 6:15 a.m. The air felt different somehow. Heavier, like right before a storm, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky. Not yet, anyway. My job is to make sure the park is safe for visitors and to keep an eye on anything unusual. Most days that means chasing away the occasional snake from the walking paths or helping lost hikers. This wasn't going to be most days. Was driving my usual route when I noticed something strange in the ground about half a mile off the main road. Circles in the dirt. Perfect circles, like someone had drawn them with a giant compass. They spread out like ripples in a pond after you throw in a rock. That's odd, I said to myself, pulling my truck over. No one should have been out this far, especially not to draw patterns in the dirt. I grabbed my binoculars from the passenger seat and scanned the area. That's when I saw it. A dead coyote lying near one of the smaller cave entrances. Not one we take tourists to. Something was wrong with it. The way it was twisted, unnatural, and parts of its skin looked like they'd been removed, not torn, by another animal. Removed, like someone peeled an orange. A gust of wind blew across my face, carrying a smell I couldn't quite place, like copper pennies and something sour that burned my nose a little. I looked up to see dark clouds gathering, even though the weather report had promised clear skies all week. My radio crackled, making me jump. "Patterson, you there? Over." It was Martinez from the visitor center. "Go ahead, over. We're getting some weird readings down here. The seismographs are picking up activity underneath the tourist sections. Nothing dangerous yet, but definitely not normal. Can you check it out? Over." "Copy that. I'm about 5 miles from the east entrance. I'll head over. Patterson out." As I put the radio back on my belt, I noticed a flock of birds overhead, flying in crazy patterns. Birds follow strict flight paths, especially during migration. These ones looked confused, scared. I wiped sweat from my forehead. It was getting hot. Too hot for this early in the morning. My uniform was already sticking to my back as I walked toward the unmarked cave entrance near the dead coyote. Small rocks on the ground started to vibrate, making a sound like someone tapping their fingers on a table. There was no cause I could see. No trucks driving by, no machinery. I reached for my canteen and took a swig of water, then immediately spit it out. It had been fresh when I filled it this morning, but now it tasted like metal and was cloudy when I poured a little into my palm. Looking at that cave entrance, old memories came flooding back. 15 years ago, I was working as a geologist for a mining company. We were exploring a new site when the tunnel collapsed. 3 of my friends died. I made it out, but my left leg never healed right. The scars still ache when the weather changes. After that, I couldn't go back to mining. I joined the Park Service instead, thinking it would be safer. I became something of an expert on the cave systems here, especially the ones tourists never see. As I stood there trying to make sense of everything, I heard someone calling my name. "Ranger Patterson!" I turned to see Gabriel Sosi jogging toward me. Gabriel worked maintenance at the park, but I knew him as more than that. He was Navajo, and his knowledge of the land went deeper than any guidebook. "Gabriel." I nodded as he reached me. "What brings you out here?" He was breathing hard, like he'd been running for a while. "Same as you, I think. Something's wrong." He looked at the cave entrance, then at the dead coyote, and I saw real fear in his eyes. "My grandfather," he said quietly, "he disappeared out here in 1925. His last words to my grandmother were that the ground had teeth." I reached into my backpack and pulled out a worn book, a collection of regional folklore I'd been studying. For years, many pages were dog-eared with my notes scribbled in the margins. "Does it have anything to do with this?" I asked, opening to a page about the red earth that hungers. I'd always thought it was just a story. Gabriel's face went pale. "The elders in my tribe, they perform ceremonies every season. They say it's to keep what sleeps below from waking." Persistent cough, a souvenir from years of breathing desert dust, suddenly got worse. I doubled over, hacking into my sleeve. "Are you okay?" Gabriel asked, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Fine," I wheezed, straightening up. "Just the usual." I looked down at the unmarked cave entrance, then back at Gabriel. "I need to check this out. The seismic activity could be dangerous for the tourists if it's centered under the main caverns." "I'm coming with you," he said firmly. It wasn't an offer, but a statement. I nodded, not mentioning that I was glad for the company. Some places shouldn't be explored alone. As we gathered our equipment, I thought briefly about the divorce papers still sitting unsigned in my truck's glove compartment. Sarah had finally given up on me 6 months ago. said she couldn't understand why I was so obsessed with these caves, why I kept coming back to the same spots, taking samples, making notes that I never shared with anyone. Maybe today I'd find out if I was crazy or if there had been something to my obsession all along. Ready? I asked Gabriel, clicking on my flashlight. He nodded, his face grim. As ready as anyone can be to visit a place my people have avoided for centuries. Together, we stepped into the darkness, not knowing that within hours, only one Avi. Us would emerge again, changed forever by what waited below in the hungry earth. The entrance to the cave was smaller than it looked from a distance, barely big enough for a grown man to squeeze through. I went first, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. "Watch your head," I told Gabriel as he followed me in. The air inside was cool and damp, a welcome change from the desert heat. But there was something else too, a strange smell, like wet metal and rotting eggs. "You smell that?" I asked. Gabriel nodded, his face looking greenish in the light of his headlamp. "It's not natural." The tunnel widened after about 50 feet, opening into a small chamber with 3 different passages branching off. I'd been in hundreds of caves over the years, but something about this one made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Which way?" Gabriel asked, his voice echoing slightly. I pointed my flashlight at the ground. "See these marks here? Water always flows downward. If we follow where it's going, we'll find the deepest part of the cave system." As we moved deeper, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every sound, water dripping, rocks, settling, our own breathing, seemed too loud. "My grandfather's journal," Gabriel said suddenly, breaking the silence. He wrote about finding this place, said the ground felt wrong under his feet. No one believed him, thought he was just scared of being in a cave. After he disappeared, my grandmother kept his writings hidden. She only showed them to me when I started working at the park. I stopped to catch my breath. My cough was getting worse down here, which was strange. Usually the moist cave air helped. My lungs. "Did the journal say what happened to him?" I asked. Gabriel's face was grim. "Just that he found something down deep. Something that shouldn't be there. The last entry said he was going back one more time to make sure." We continued downward, the passage getting narrower and steeper. My light swept across the walls, and I froze. "Gabriel," I whispered, "look at this." The walls weren't normal limestone anymore. They were covered in a strange red clay that seemed to pulse, like it was breathing. When I shone my flashlight directly on it, the light dimmed, as if the red stuff was swallowing it. "I've never seen anything like this," I said, reaching out. "Don't touch it." Gabriel grabbed my wrist. "Please, just don't." I nodded, lowering my hand. We pressed on, but the red clay was everywhere now, covering the floors and ceiling too. Our boots made sucking sounds with each step, like walking through mud. About 2 hours in, we found the cave paintings. They covered the walls of a large chamber, stretching up beyond where our lights could reach. The images were simple but clear, stick figures of people bringing animals and other people to a large, round shape in the ground, dropping them in, feeding them to the earth. Gabriel studied the images, his hand shaking slightly. "These are old, thousands of years old." Suddenly, my radio crackled with static, making us both jump. I tried to respond, but all I got was a high-pitched whine before it died completely. At the same moment, Gabriel's flashlight flickered and went out. "Battery's dead," he said, sounding confused. "I put new ones in this morning." My own flashlight began to dim. I quickly pulled out the chemical light sticks I always carried as backup. Their green glow was weaker than our flashlights, but it was better than nothing. "We should head back," Gabriel said, eyeing the passage behind us. I was about to agree when I noticed something glinting in the dirt near my feet. I bent down and picked it up. An old camera, the kind they used in the 1930s. It was crushed, like something heavy had. I stepped on it. A few feet away, half buried in the red clay, was a military dog tag from World War II. And beside that, something that made my blood run cold. A modern backpack, the fabric still bright, the zippers not yet rusted. It looked new. Maybe from this past summer. "We're not the first to come down here," I said quietly. "And the others didn't make it out," Gabriel finished for me. We both turned to head back, but I froze mid-step. The tunnel we'd come through, it looked different. Narrower. The ceiling lower. "Was it like this before?" I asked, feeling a knot form in my stomach. Gabriel shook his head slowly. "No, I'm sure it wasn't." As we stood there, I noticed something else. The temperature was rising. Caves are supposed to stay cool, around 55 degrees year-round. But I was sweating again, like I'd been in the desert sun. My watch read 105 degrees. That was impossible. Just then, the ground shook beneath our feet. Not a big earthquake, just a small rumble. But it was enough to send small rocks falling from the ceiling. "We need to move," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We hurried back toward the entrance, but at a fork in the tunnel, I hesitated. Both ways looked familiar, and unfamiliar at the same time. "This way," I said, choosing the path that sloped upward, hoping it would lead to the surface. As we rushed through the narrow passage, I sliced my hand open on a sharp rock jutting from the wall. Blood dripped onto the cave floor and vanished. The red clay absorbed it instantly. I stopped, staring. "Did you see that?" Before Gabriel could answer, a clear liquid began to seep from the walls around us. Where it dripped onto my sleeve, the fabric sizzled and dissolved. "Acid!" I shouted, pulling Gabriel away as the flow increased. We ran then, no longer caring about being careful. Behind us, I heard a sound like wet rocks sliding together. When I glanced back, the tunnel was closing, the red clay flowing like lava to seal the path we'd just come through. That's when I understood with perfect, horrible clarity. "Gabriel," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "The cave. It's not a cave." He looked at me, his eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "It's alive. The whole system. We're inside something. Ancient. And I think it's hungry." As if answering me, the entire cavern shuddered, and a deep vibration passed through the rock beneath our feet. It wasn't an earthquake, it was a growl. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Gabriel's arm. We stumbled through the tunnel as the rumbling grew louder behind us. The chemical. Light sticks cast strange dancing shadows on the walls. The red clay seemed to be moving now, reaching out in finger-like shapes when we weren't looking directly at it. But whenever I turned my head to watch, it would freeze, like a child playing a game of statues. "This makes no sense," I gasped between breaths. "Caves don't move. They don't digest things." Gabriel's face was shiny with sweat in the green glow of our light sticks. "My grandfather's journal. He wrote that the earth here was old, older than people, that it learned to hunt." Another rumble shook the cave, stronger this time. Dust and small rocks rained down on us. "We need to find another way out," I said, trying to think clearly despite the fear clouding my mind. We reached a large chamber with a ceiling so high our lights couldn't reach it. The floor sloped down toward the center, where a pool of something dark and still sat like a mirror. The red clay covered everything, thicker here, pulsing visibly even in our dim light. As we moved around the edge of the chamber, I felt something squish under my boot. Looking down, I saw what looked like a thin tube embedded in the floor. When I stepped on it, the walls of the chamber trembled slightly. "It's like a nerve," I whispered. "The whole cave system. It's like a body, with a stomach and a mouth, and a brain," Gabriel finished, pointing across the chamber. There, nestled in an alcove, was a mass of twisted, pulsating red material, threaded with what looked like thin white roots. It expanded and contracted slowly, like it was breathing. I reached into my sample bag, suddenly remembering the minerals I'd collected over the years. strange formations I'd found in this area that didn't match anything in geology textbooks. Maybe these can help us, I said, showing Gabriel the samples. If this thing is alive, maybe we can hurt it somehow. Something brushed against my mind then. Not a sound, but a feeling. Like when you're in a room and suddenly know someone is watching you. But this was stronger. A pressure inside my skull. An image flashed in my head. An exit. A way out just through the next tunnel. Safety. This way, I said, pointing to a passage on our right. I think that's the way out. Gabriel grabbed my shoulder. Wait, how do you know? I shook my head, trying to clear it. I don't know. I just felt it. His eyes narrowed. It's trying to trick us. Don't listen to anything in your head. This thing, it's smart. As if angry at being discovered, the chamber suddenly shook violently. The ceiling above us shifted, and I looked up to see what I had thought were stalactites starting to move. They weren't rock formations at all. They were teeth, long, pointed, and now detaching from the ceiling to reposition themselves. We need to split up, I said quickly. Give ourselves better odds. Bad idea, Gabriel argued. We should stick together. But before we could decide, the choice was made for us. The ground between us cracked open with a sound like tearing cloth. In seconds, a chasm 8 feet wide separated us. Gabriel, I shouted, moving to the edge. Stay back, he yelled, stepping away from his side of the gap. The edges aren't stable. He was right. The red clay around the chasm was moving, widening the gap inch by inch. Try to find a way around, I called out. I'll do the same. We'll meet. A section of the ceiling collapsed between us, cutting off my words and my view of Gabriel. When the dust cleared, a wall of rubble stood where my friend had been. Gabriel, I shouted again, but there was no answer. Then I heard it, a scream from the other side of the rock wall, Gabriel's voice, filled with terror. It's got me! Howard, it's got my leg! I frantically began pulling at the rocks, trying to clear a path to him. Hold on, I'm coming! The screaming continued, then changed, became wet, gurgling sounds, then silence. My hands were bleeding from the sharp rocks, but I barely noticed. I kept digging until the wall shifted dangerously, threatening to collapse on me too. Gabriel, I whispered, knowing it was too late. The pressure returned to my mind, stronger now. Images of easy passages, quick ways out. But behind them, I sensed something else. Hunger, ancient and patient. This thing had eaten people before, many people, and it had learned from each one, learned how to lure more in, learned how to keep them from escaping. I backed away from the wall, my mind racing. The samples in my bag. If the cave was alive, maybe it could be hurt. Poisoned. I emptied my bag on the ground, hands shaking as I sorted through the mineral samples I'd collected. Some were soft, crumbly, others hard and crystalline. One, a blue-white chunk I'd found. Near a hot spring, had always seemed to repel moisture around it. When I held it up to the pulsing red clay, the material actually shrank back, like it was painful to be near. That's when I had an idea. Working quickly, I crushed several samples, together between two rocks, mixing them into a rough powder. I'd studied enough chemistry to know some minerals react when combined. Some create heat, others acid. The ground shook again, more violently this time. The thing knew what I was doing. It was trying to stop me. I looked around wildly for the brain-like structure we'd seen earlier, but it had moved, hiding itself. Fine. If I couldn't attack the brain directly, I'd go for the nerves. I found another of the tube-like structures in the floor and quickly dug around it with my knife. When I had exposed a section about a foot long, I packed my mineral mixture around it, then took out my emergency fire starter. Let's see how you like heartburn, I muttered, striking the flint. The mixture caught fire with a blue-white flame. much hotter than I expected. It burned through the nerve tube in seconds. An unholy sound filled the chamber, not heard with my ears but felt in my bones and teeth, a screech of pain that made my vision blur. The entire cave system convulsed. The walls rippled like water. The floor heaved upward, then dropped, and then, everywhere around me, the red clay began to move with purpose, flowing faster, coating everything. I watched in horror as a small rock was covered completely, then dissolved before my eyes. Broken. Down in minutes. The entity was accelerating its digestive process, and I was next on the menu. I had only seconds to act. The red clay was flowing faster now, covering the floor and walls, reaching for me like hungry fingers. I scrambled backward, looking for any escape route. There. A narrow crack in the wall that hadn't been there before. The cave's violent movements had opened new passages. This one had fresh air flowing through it. I could feel it on my face. I rushed toward it, but as I reached the opening, the ground beneath me shifted. I lost my footing and fell hard, my left arm plunging elbow-deep into a pool of the red clay. The pain was immediate and blinding. It felt like 1,000 tiny teeth were biting into my skin, working their way down to the bone. I screamed and pulled, but my arm was stuck fast. Around my trapped arm, the red clay was hardening rapidly, turning white and solid like fast-drying cement. The cave was trying to hold me in place while it digested me. I knew in that moment, had a terrible choice, stay and die, or, without letting myself think about it, I took out my knife with my right hand. The cave shuddered again, sensing what I was about to do. I gritted my teeth and began to cut around my arm, just above the elbow where the clay had hardened. The pain was beyond anything I'd ever felt. Black spots danced in my vision. But survival, instinct is a powerful thing. I kept cutting. I don't remember finishing. The next thing I knew, I was free, crawling toward the crack in the wall. Blood poured from what remained of my left arm. Using my belt as a tourniquet, I managed to slow the bleeding, but I was already lightheaded from blood loss. Move, I told myself out loud. Move, or die here. The crack was barely wide enough for my shoulders, but I squeezed through, feeling the rough stone scrape against my skin. Behind me, I heard the red clay flowing, trying to follow. But it seemed weaker now, slower. My attack on its nerve center had hurt it. The passage beyond was tight but sloped upward. I followed it blindly, my remaining chemical light stick providing just enough glow to see a few feet ahead. Every few minutes, the entire cave system would shudder and shift, like a wounded animal trying to shake off pain. I crawled for what felt like hours, leaving a trail of blood behind me. The air grew fresher, and the red clay thinned out and eventually disappeared altogether. Normal limestone surrounded me again. When I finally saw daylight filtering through a small opening, I thought I might be hallucinating. But it was real. A tiny exit, hidden among rocks that opened onto the desert floor about 2 miles from where Gabriel and I had entered. I dragged myself out into the harsh sunlight, the heat hitting me like a physical blow after the cool dampness of the cave. My vision was fading in and out. I knew I needed help soon or I'd bleed to death right here. With the last of my strength, I pulled out my small field notebook and pencil. I had to document what we'd found, what had happened to Gabrielle. I sketched the entity's nerve structures, the brain-like mass, notes about the minerals that had hurt it. Then I lay back, staring at the sky, waiting to be found or to die, whichever came first. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Carlsbad. They told me a hiking group had found me unconscious in the desert, barely alive. The doctors had managed to save me, but my left arm was gone below the elbow. Men in dark suits came to question me. Government types, though they never said which agency. They listened to my story without expression, took my notebook, and told me there would be an official investigation. 2 weeks later, they came back. They said they'd found no evidence of the cave entrance I described. No sign of Gabriel Tsosi. My story would be recorded as Equipment failure in unstable terrain, leading to Gabriel's death and my injury. But it's still there, I insisted, my voice hoarse. It's just hidden itself. The older of the two men leaned forward. Mr. Patterson, we examined the entire area. We brought in ground-penetrating radar. There's nothing there but solid rock. Then it's healed itself, I said. It can move, change. It's alive. They exchanged looks I recognized all too well. The same looks people gave my ex-wife when she tried to explain my cave obsession. They left, and I knew the case was closed as far as they were concerned. But not for me. That was 6 months ago. I'm not a ranger anymore. Can't be, with one arm. I live in a small apartment in Carlsbad now, the walls covered with maps and notes. Sometimes I wake up screaming, feeling the red clay crawling up my missing arm. The doctors call it phantom limb pain. They don't understand that sometimes I can feel what it's doing, how it's growing. I've been back to the park several times, always staying on public trails. The area where Gabriel and I found the cave entrance is blocked off now, officially due to unstable ground conditions. But I've seen the men in hazmat suits going in and out at night. They found something, even if they won't admit it. Yesterday, I noticed a small red stain on my bathroom floor. Just a tiny spot, easily mistaken for rust. But when I touched it, it moved ever so slightly. Pulled back from my finger, and last night, for the first time since the cave, I felt that pressure in my mind again. Images of dark, cool places, of deep earth and silence. It's calling me back. I know what you're thinking, that I'm crazy, traumatized, that my mind broke down there in the darkness. Maybe you're right, but before you decide, ask yourself this. What? Do you really know about the ground beneath your feet? The earth we walk on every day? We think we understand our world, but we've barely scratched the surface. There are things down there in the deep places, ancient things, patient things, and they're hungry. So if you're ever hiking near Carlsbad Caverns and you see unusual circular patterns in the soil, or if the air suddenly smells like copper and something sour, run. Run and don't look back. Because the red earth is waiting, and next time it might be calling for you. My name is Cassandra Reeves, and I've been a ranger here at Everglades National Park for almost 8 years now. Before that, I was a marine biologist, but I quit when I saw how companies kept polluting our waters and nobody did anything about it. Out here in the swamp, I feel like I can actually make a difference. This morning started like most others. I took my airboat out just as the sun was coming up, gliding through the cypress trees while mist hung over the water. The sunrise turned everything golden and black, like nature's own painting. I love this time of day most. It's quiet but full of life if you know where to look. A blue heron took off right in front of me, its long body looking like a picture against the pink morning clouds. Its wings barely made a sound as it disappeared into the sky. Spanish moss hung from the trees like gray curtains, swaying slightly in the morning breeze. The air felt thick and wet, the way it always does in August. You could smell everything stronger. The rich dirt smell of peat, the green scent of algae, and the sweet smell of water lilies blooming across the surface. Some city people hate this smell, but to me, it's the perfume of a healthy swamp. Something felt off, though. I cut the engine of my boat and just listened. That's when I noticed it. Silence. No bugs buzzing, no birds calling to each other. Nothing but the sound of water hitting the sides of my boat. In the Everglades, silence isn't natural. It's a warning. I checked my depth finder, this little machine that shows what's under the water. What I saw made no sense. There were patterns down there, perfect shapes that looked man-made. But I know these waters better than anyone. And there, Shouldn't be anything like that here. We'd had heavy rain upstream for weeks now. The water was much higher than normal, covering areas that had been dry land for as long as I'd worked here. That's when I noticed something else strange. Alligators. At least a dozen of them, all floating in the water and facing the same direction, like they were waiting for something. I've studied gator behavior for years, and I've never seen anything like it. About a mile ahead was a small ranger outpost, just a simple building on stilts over the water. Jackson and Miller were supposed to be there, doing a week-long survey of bird migrations. But they'd missed their radio check-ins for 3 days straight now. My boss thought they were just being lazy, but I had a bad feeling. I dipped my hand in the water and was shocked at how cold it felt. Using my thermometer, I confirmed it was 10 degrees cooler than it should be, despite the air being hot and sticky. That's not just unusual. It's impossible without something major happening underwater. As I leaned over the side of my boat, I saw something that made my heart jump. Dark shapes moving under the surface, going against the current. They were too big to be fish, too organized to be alligators. They moved with purpose, like they knew where they were going. Most people don't understand why I care so much about this place. After watching corporations dump chemicals into our waters and getting away with it, I decided to protect what was left instead of just studying it. The tattoos on my arms tell that story. Images of Florida animals that don't exist anymore because we didn't protect them in time. I wasn't alone on the boat that morning. Joseph Rivers, a liaison from the Miccosukee tribe, sat quietly at the front. He'd asked to come along because the rising waters were covering some of his people's ancient burial grounds. Joseph was in his 60s, with deep lines in his face that seemed to hold all the stories of his ancestors. He'd been watching. The water, too, and I could tell by his expression that he was seeing the same things I was. "Something woke up," he said simply, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him, waiting for more, and that's when he told me about his tribe's oldest stories, about the long ones who sleep in deep mud until the waters rise. I'm a scientist, at heart. I believe in what I can see, touch, and measure. But out here in the Everglades, with the silence pressing in around us and those shapes moving with intention beneath our boat, I found myself believing every word Joseph said. We were being watched, and whatever was watching us had been waiting a very long time to wake up. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small container. Inside were samples I'd collected over the past few weeks, strange fungus I'd found growing on dead animals throughout the park. I hadn't told my boss about these. He'd just say I was overreacting like he always did, but something was killing these creatures from the inside out, and nobody seemed to care except me. "Look at this," I said to Joseph, showing him the container. "Found this growing on a dead deer last week. Never seen anything like it before." Joseph studied it through the clear plastic but didn't touch it. Smart man. "The water speaks to my people," he said. "It tells us when it's sick. This water is very sick." I nodded and put the samples away. At 38, I'd spent most of my adult life studying these wetlands. People at park headquarters called me the Everglades expert. But when I tried to warn them about changes I was seeing, they just patted me on the head like I was a worried child. "We should check the outpost," I said, starting up the airboat again. "Jackson and Miller might need help." As we moved deeper into the swamp, I pulled out my notebook. Inside were all my water test results, findings that showed chemicals and patterns the Environmental Protection Agency had told me not to worry about. For 3 months, I'd been collecting samples, sending reports, and being ignored. I had asked for a transfer last month. No answer yet. My boss didn't like how I kept pushing about the water quality, how I wouldn't just smile and tell the tourists everything was fine. "They think I'm paranoid," I said to Joseph over the engine's noise. "No," he replied, his eyes scanning the trees around us. "They are afraid of what you know." After years of fighting with park management, I had almost given up. Almost. But then, animals started dying in ways I couldn't explain, and the water levels rose higher than any records showed they should. And I knew something was happening that couldn't be ignored anymore. Joseph suddenly stiffened, his hand gripping the side of the boat. "We are being watched," he said. Not asked, said, like he knew for certain. I cut the engine again, and we drifted. The water around us was dark brown from the tannins, natural compounds from the plants that stain the water like tea. Usually, you can see a few feet down, but today it seemed darker, more hiding than revealing. Near a cluster of cypress knees, those woody spikes that stick up from the tree roots, we found some abandoned equipment, scientific stuff, seismic monitors, water testing gear, high-tech tools that cost more than I make in a year. They were set up to take readings from deep underground, but the data made no sense. The graphs showed patterns like heartbeats, not the steady lines of normal geology. Someone was tracking them, Joseph said quietly. They knew something was down there. I noticed the water plants around us were dying, but not like normal. They weren't drying out or being eaten. They were rotting from the bottom up, like something was poisoning them from below. I pulled out my compass, a simple tool I've carried since I was a Girl Scout. As we drifted over certain areas, the needle spun wildly, pointing nowhere and everywhere. That's not supposed to happen. We should go back, Joseph suggested, but we both knew we wouldn't. Not yet. Around the next bend, the smell hit us, the unmistakable stench of death. 5 or 6 animal carcasses, deer, raccoons, a wild hog, all floating in the water. I pulled on rubber gloves and brought the closest one, a raccoon, into the boat for a closer look. Its fur was perfect, not a mark on it, but when I pressed its side, my finger sank in like pushing into jelly. Whatever killed it had liquefied, its insides while leaving the skin intact. "Never seen anything like this," I whispered, my stomach turning. "It's like it was digested from the inside." Joseph pointed to something floating near another dead animal. It was a waterproof camera case. I fished it out and opened it. Inside was an expensive camera, the kind wildlife photographers use. The memory card was still inside. I turned on the camera and looked at the most recent photos. Most were normal Everglades shots, birds, gators, sunsets. But the last dozen images made my blood run cold. Something long and pale moved under the cypress roots. The photos were blurry, like the photographer's hands were shaking, but I could make out segmented bodies, like giant centipedes or worms, but much, much larger. The last image showed what looked like a mouth, round and ringed with teeth, opening wide beneath the photographer's position. My hands trembled as I showed Joseph. "The long ones," he said, his voice barely audible. "They've returned." I took some water samples and test tubes, sealing them carefully. Under my small microscope, I could see tiny creatures swimming in the drop of water, parasites I'd never seen before in all my years of study. They moved with purpose, not like normal. "Microbes, we need to warn." I began but stopped when our radio suddenly crackled to life. "Return to coordinates 2631 by -80, 98, said a flat, emotionless voice that sounded vaguely like Jackson, one of the missing rangers. "All personnel required. Discovery made. Return immediately." Joseph and I looked at each other. Those coordinates would take us deeper into the unmarked swamp away from any trails or outposts. "That doesn't sound like Jackson," I said. "Not really." "It is not him anymore," Joseph replied simply. The sun was setting now, and what happened next made both of us gasp. The water began to glow, a pale blue-green light coming from below the surface. As darkness fell completely, we could see massive shapes moving in patterns beneath our boat, coordinated like a school of fish, but each one had to be at least 20 feet long. The temperature dropped suddenly, making me shiver. A thick mist rose from the water, limiting our visibility to just a few yards in any direction. We were essentially blind, floating above creatures we couldn't identify, with no clear way back. There. Joseph pointed to our left, his voice tight with fear. Through the mist, I could make out one of the ancient shell mounds, hills built by indigenous people thousands of years ago. I knew this area well. That mound should have been shaped like a half moon, but now it was arranged in a perfect circle, with channels cut through it at regular intervals. "That's impossible," I whispered. "Those mounds weigh tons. They can't just be rearranged." "Not by humans," Joseph agreed. "We need to leave this place now." I started the engine, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the throttle. Whatever was in these waters, whatever had woken up, it was changing the Everglades. And I was becoming more and more certain that no one who knew about it was getting out alive to tell the story. The mist grew thicker around us as I steered the airboat back toward the main channel, or at least where I thought it should be. Even with my years of experience in the Everglades, I was becoming disoriented. The glowing water beneath us cast an eerie blue light that made shadows dance and shift. That's when we saw it, parts of it at least. A pale, segmented body broke the surface about 30 feet away. It looked like an enormous worm or eel, but its skin was ghostly white, almost translucent. The segment I could see was as thick as my waist. Then it slipped back under, leaving barely a ripple. "Did you?" I started to ask. "Yes," Joseph cut me off. "One of the long ones." More segments appeared, this time closer to our boat. Not one creature, but many. Their bodies reminded me of lampreys or water centipedes, segmented and flexible, able to twist in impossible ways. When they moved together, they created currents that pushed smaller fish ahead of them like cattle being herded. "They're hunting together," I whispered, "like they're intelligent." Joseph nodded grimly. "My grandfather spoke of them. They think as one." I noticed strange markings along their pale bodies, patterns that looked almost like writing or symbols. Joseph leaned forward, squinting at one that surfaced near our boat. "Those markings," he said, his voice tight, "they match the carvings in our most sacred places, places where only our medicine people are allowed to go." Before I could respond, a sound hit us. Not exactly a noise you could hear, more like pressure, against my eardrums. It came in pulses. My vision blurred, and for a second I thought I saw the water turn to solid ground, then back to water again. My stomach lurched. "Don't listen," Joseph said, pressing his hands against his ears. "They confuse the mind, make us see things that aren't real." I shook my head, trying to clear it, and focused on taking samples from the glowing water. Under my portable microscope, what I saw alarmed me even more. The water chemistry was changing, becoming more acidic, with compounds I couldn't identify. Whatever these creatures were, they were altering the environment around them, making it hostile to native species but perfect for themselves. "We need to find Jackson and Miller," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Then get back to headquarters with these samples." Joseph looked doubtful, but nodded. We followed the radio signal, which kept broadcasting that same message in Jackson's flat voice. After about 20 minutes, we spotted a light through the mist, the research outpost sitting half submerged in the rising water. As we approached, I called out, "Jackson, Miller, it's Cassandra Reeves and Joseph Rivers. Are you there?" A figure appeared in the doorway of the outpost. It had Jackson's shape and wore his uniform, but something was very wrong. His movements were stiff, jerky, like a puppet on strings. His skin had a grayish tint, and when he turned to look at us, his eyes were cloudy and blank. "You came," he said in that same flat voice from the radio. "Good. They want to meet you." Behind him, I could see Miller and two others, probably the wildlife photographer whose camera we'd found and someone else I didn't recognize. They all had that same gray skin and empty eyes. "What happened to you?" I asked, keeping our boat a safe distance from the structure. Jackson tilted his head like he was listening to something we couldn't hear. "We have been improved. They have shown us the future." That's when I noticed something moving under the collar of his shirt, something squirming beneath his skin. All four of them had it. Movements under their clothing, like they had small animals crawling around inside their bodies. Miller stepped forward, and I could see that the side of his neck had split open, revealing not blood and tissue, but what looked like wet, gill-like structures. They fluttered slightly as he breathed. "They live inside us now," Miller said, his voice dreamlike. "They clean our blood, fix our bodies. We don't need medicine anymore. Don't need technology. They take care of everything." Joseph gripped my arm so hard it hurt. "Cassandra," he whispered. "Look at the water around them." Smaller versions of the creatures we'd seen were swimming around the stilts of the outpost. Hundreds of them, each about the size of a small snake. Some climbed partially out of the water, their bodies coated in thick mucus that seemed to protect them from the air. "They can leave the water," I said, horrified. "They can come on land, only for short times now," Jackson said, overhearing me. "But they're adapting, learning. Soon they'll be able to go anywhere. Won't that be wonderful? Everyone will be improved." I started backing our boat away, but Jackson called out, "Wait! You need to meet the mother. She's the one who decides who gets chosen." "The mother?" I couldn't help asking. "The central one," Joseph murmured. "The alpha. The leader." Jackson smiled, but it wasn't a human smile anymore. "She's so beautiful, so old. She was here before humans, before mammals, maybe before dinosaurs. She slept in the deep mud until the water rose high enough. We helped with that." "What do you mean you helped?" I demanded. "We blocked the underwater channels," Miller explained, his voice filled with strange pride. "Redirected the flow, made the water rise to wake her. It was all in the seismic readings, the patterns of how water should flow to reach her chamber. That explained the abandoned equipment we'd found. Some research team had discovered the creatures, or evidence of them, and instead of warning anyone, they'd fallen under their control." "How many of you are there?" I asked, still backing our boat. "Away slowly. Dozens now," Jackson said. "Soon thousands, then millions. The mother has so many children to share." That's when I noticed something impossible happening. The water around the outpost was moving against the current, swirling in a pattern that couldn't occur naturally. The creatures were controlling the water itself, creating a whirlpool that was slowly pulling our boat toward them. "Start the engine," Joseph shouted. I yanked the cord, but the engine sputtered and died. Something had gotten into the fuel line or propeller. We were drifting closer to the outpost, to Jackson and the others with their split skin and the things living inside them. "They just want to talk to you," Jackson said soothingly. "They just want to share themselves with you. It doesn't even hurt. Not for long." I grabbed the emergency paddle from under my seat and began to frantically push us away from the swirling water. Joseph did the same on his side. "You're fighting nature," Miller called out. "The mother says this is how it's supposed to be. Humans had their time. Now it's their turn again." We managed to push free of the swirling water and into a small side channel. I kept paddling until my arms burned, Joseph matching my pace. Behind us, I could hear Jackson and the others calling out to us, their voices becoming less human with each passing moment. When we were far enough away, I tried the engine. Again. This time it started, and I gunned it, heading away from the outpost as fast as the airboat would take us. "We need to notify park headquarters," I said. "Get the CDC involved, the military, anyone." Joseph looked back over his shoulder, his face grim. "I think we may already be too late." He pointed behind us. In the fading light of the strange, glowing water, I could see dozens of boats heading out across the Everglades, all filled with gray-skinned people with blank eyes, all moving, with that same jerky, puppet-like motion, all spreading out toward populated areas. "They're beginning the migration," Joseph said quietly. "Just like the old stories warned." We sped through the dark water, guided only by my flashlight and the eerie blue glow coming from below. I knew we needed to get back to headquarters, but first, we had to understand what we were dealing with. We needed a plan. "Joseph," I said over the engine noise, "your people's stories. Did they mention any way to stop these creatures?" He was quiet for a long moment. "The stories say they fear fire and pure salt, but mostly they speak of keeping the waters low so they stay asleep in the deep mud." That gave me an idea. The water rise isn't natural. They said they blocked underwater channels. If we could unblock them, the water would drop. Joseph finished my thought. They might be forced back to their sleep. I steered us toward a small island I knew had a ranger supply cache, a metal box bolted to a cypress tree with emergency equipment inside. When we reached it, I was relieved to find it untouched. Inside were flares, first aid supplies, and a satellite phone. I tried the phone immediately, but there was no signal. "Jammers," Joseph said, pointing to a small device attached to a nearby tree that I hadn't noticed before. They've thought of everything. I pocketed some flares and a small medical kit, then checked my map with the flashlight. There's an old limestone cave system about 2 miles south. It connects to most of the underwater channels in this section of the Everglades. If they've blocked the water flow, that's where they'd do it. "We can't go alone," Joseph argued. "We need help." "There's no time," I said, looking at the distant lights of other boats moving through the swamp. By morning, they could reach the canals that connect to the cities. Millions of people. Joseph nodded gravely. "Then we go now." As we traveled south, the water grew colder and the blue glow stronger. The creatures seemed to be everywhere beneath us, their long bodies creating patterns in the glowing water like a twisted underwater dance. "Look there," Joseph said, pointing to a half-sunken structure ahead. It was an old observation platform, now mostly underwater. As we got closer, I could see it had been converted into some kind of camp. Scientific equipment was everywhere. Computers, sample containers, monitoring devices, all running despite being partially submerged. Solar panels on the roof explained the power source. "It's their research base," I whispered. "They've been studying these things." We approached cautiously, keeping the engine quiet. Through a broken window, I could see people moving inside. More infected humans like Jackson and Miller. They moved around the equipment with that same jerky motion, adjusting dials and taking readings. They're not just victims, I realized. They're helping the creatures, studying them, making them stronger. Joseph pointed to a bulletin board visible through the window. It was covered with maps of South Florida's water systems, canals, drainage networks, water treatment facilities. Red lines showed planned routes spreading out from the Everglades into populated areas. "They're planning invasion routes," Joseph said, his voice hollow. A splash nearby made us both jump. One of the creatures had surfaced just feet from our boat. In the flashlight beam, I could see it clearly for the first time. A pale, segmented body about 30 feet long, with a circular mouth ringed with teeth. But what horrified me most were its eyes. Not the small, simple eyes of a worm or eel, but large, intelligent eyes that studied us with unmistakable awareness. It made no move to attack. Instead, it seemed to be assessing us. Then it dove, its long body passing directly beneath our boat before disappearing into the depths. "It's reporting back," Joseph said quietly. We needed to move fast. We pushed on toward the limestone caves, the water growing impossibly cold and the mist thickening around us. Twice more we saw infected humans in boats, but managed to avoid them by cutting our engine and drifting silently in the mist. Finally, we reached the cave entrance, a dark hole at the waterline of a limestone cliff. I'd been here before during drought seasons when the water was low enough to walk in. Now it was completely submerged. "We'll need to swim," I said, checking my waterproof flashlight. Joseph looked doubtful. "In the water, with them?" "We don't have a choice," I replied, though the thought terrified me too. We anchored the boat and prepared to dive. I had a small underwater camera in my emergency kit, which I strapped to my wrist. Whatever we found down there, people needed to see it. "Wait," Joseph said, pulling something from around his neck. A small leather pouch. My grandfather gave me this, said it would protect me from the long ones if they ever returned. He opened it and shook some of its contents into his palm, a mixture of white powder and dried herbs. He used his finger to draw a symbol on his forehead, then on mine. "Salt and sacred plants," he explained. "It might help, it might not. But we try everything now." I nodded, touched by the gesture. Science had gotten us this far, but I wasn't about to refuse any extra help. "If we get separated," I said, "or if something happens to me, try to make it back with the evidence. People need to know." Joseph looked me in the eye. "The same goes for you." We took deep breaths and slipped into the water. The cold hit me like a physical blow, almost making me gasp. The water glowed blue around us, making it easy to see without the flashlight, but the light cast strange, shifting shadows that played tricks on my eyes. We swam into the cave, the narrow entrance opening into a larger underwater chamber. What we saw inside made us both freeze in shock. The creatures had built a structure, a massive wall of mud, plant matter, and debris that completely blocked what should have been a flowing underwater river. But it wasn't just a simple dam. It had channels and gates, an engineered system that could control exactly how much water flowed through and where it went. And it was guarded. Dozens of the creatures patrolled around it, their long bodies creating currents that made it hard to stay in place. Among them were infected humans in diving gear, working on the structure, adjusting the flow gates. Joseph pointed to a section of the wall that looked different. Metal cylinders embedded in the mud. Explosives. The research team had built this dam with demolition in mind, probably as a failsafe in case they needed to restore water flow quickly. We swam closer, hiding behind a limestone column. I could see that the explosives had detonators attached, but they seemed inactive. We'd need to turn them on manually. As we watched, the water around us began to pulse with light, brighter then dimmer in a regular pattern. The creatures responded, gathering together and facing the same direction, like they were awaiting orders. That's when we felt it. A presence so powerful it seemed to press on our minds. Something massive was approaching from the depths beyond the dam. The Mother. We couldn't see it yet, but we could feel it coming, ancient, intelligent, and hungry. Joseph looked at me, his eyes wide with fear behind his dive mask. He pointed to the explosives, then to himself, and made a go-back motion to me. He was volunteering to set off the charges while I escaped with the evidence. I shook my head firmly. We'd do this together or not at all. But before we could move, a spotlight from above caught us in its beam. One of the infected divers had spotted us. Immediately, the creatures began swimming in our direction, their circular mouths opening to reveal rows of teeth. Joseph pushed me behind the limestone column and swam out into the open, drawing their attention. He kicked toward the explosives, his movements desperate but determined. I wanted to help him, to swim after him, but 3 of the creatures had broken off from the main group and were coming toward my hiding place. I had seconds to decide. Try to help Joseph and likely get us both killed, or escape with the evidence and warn the world. With tears blurring my vision underwater, I chose the latter. I kicked hard, swimming back toward the cave entrance, the camera clutched tightly in my hand. Behind me, I heard a muffled underwater explosion, felt the shockwave hit my body like a truck. The force of it propelled me out of the cave entrance and into open water, where I surfaced gasping. All around me, the water was churning violently, the blue glow flickering like a dying light bulb. Joseph had done it. He'd detonated the explosives. I pulled myself into our boat, my body shaking from cold and shock. Looking back at the cave entrance, I saw the water level already beginning to drop as the blocked channel was cleared. The underground river was flowing again. But my relief was short-lived. The explosion had done more than just destroy the dam. It had angered them. The water around the boat began to boil with activity as dozens, then hundreds of the creatures surfaced, their pale bodies glowing with rage. And in the center of them all, rising like a living island, was something so vast I couldn't see all of it at once. A massive, bloated version of the smaller creatures, but with hundreds of writhing appendages and a mouth large enough to swallow a car. The mother had arrived. I snapped picture after picture with my camera, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the button. This was it, the evidence the world needed to see. Then a massive wave hit the boat, flipping it completely. I was thrown into the water, right into the midst of the awakened creatures. Cold water rushed into my mouth and nose as I sank beneath the surface. Panic gripped me, but years of training kicked in. I forced myself to stay calm, to hold what breath I had left, and to open my eyes underwater. What I saw will haunt me forever. Thousands of the creatures surrounded me, their pale bodies glowing in the dark water. They weren't attacking. They were gathering, forming a living wall that kept me from swimming to the surface. And at the center of them all was the mother. She was enormous, at least 100 feet long, with a body thicker than a bus. Unlike the smaller creatures, she had multiple mouths along her segmented body, each ringed with teeth that moved independently. Her skin wasn't just pale but almost transparent, revealing organs and fluids pulsing inside, but it was her eyes that truly terrified me. Dozens of them spread across her massive head, all focused directly on me. There was intelligence in those eyes. Ancient, cold, patient intelligence. Around her, I could see what looked like large, translucent sacs attached to her body, each one filled with tiny wriggling forms. Eggs. Thousands upon thousands of eggs, ready to hatch and spread. My lungs were burning. I needed air, but the creatures kept me surrounded, kept me from reaching the surface. The mother moved closer, her massive form creating currents that tumbled me around like a leaf in a storm. One of her appendages reached toward me, not to grab or hurt, but to touch. The moment it made contact with my arm, I felt a sharp sting, like a needle piercing my skin. She was injecting me with something. I could feel it spreading through my body, cold, like liquid ice in my veins. This was how it started. This was how humans became hosts. My vision began to blur, either from lack of oxygen or from whatever she'd put inside me. In my fading consciousness, I remembered the flares in my pocket and the oxygen tank still strapped to my back from our dive into the cave. With the last of my strength, I pulled out a flare, struck it against the oxygen tank, and let go. Underwater, the flare sputtered but didn't go out. Instead, it burned with a desperate chemical light. The creatures nearest to me recoiled from the brightness. The mother's appendage withdrew. That's when I remembered what Joseph had said. They fear fire. I still had the second flare. With numb fingers, I pulled it out and struck it too. Now I held a light in both hands. The creatures backed away further, creating a small space around me. It was enough. I kicked hard and broke the surface, gulping air into my burning lungs. The overturned airboat was about 20 feet away. I swam toward it, still holding the flares above the water. Behind me, I could hear splashing as the creatures followed, but they kept their distance from the fire. When I reached the boat, I saw something that gave me a desperate idea. The fuel tank had ruptured when the boat flipped, spreading gasoline across the water's surface. And beneath that, I could still see the blue glow, the methane gas naturally rising from the peat beds below. The Everglades are basically one giant peat bog. Peat traps methane gas as it decomposes. Usually the water keeps this gas contained, but with the recent disturbances and the creatures' activities, more gas than normal was rising to the surface. I might not be able to kill all the creatures, but I could hurt them. Badly. I swam a safe distance away, then turned and threw one of my flares toward the spreading gas slick. The explosion was bigger than I expected. Flames shot 20 feet into the air as the gasoline ignited. But what happened next was even more incredible. The fire spread along the surface, following paths of methane gas I couldn't even see. Soon, large sections of the swamp were burning, with eerie blue-green flames. Underwater, I could see the creatures writhing in pain, retreating from the heat and light. The mother let out a sound I felt rather than heard, a deep vibration that shook the water around me. They were retreating, diving deeper to escape the fire. The flames wouldn't last long. There wasn't enough fuel, but it gave me time to swim to a nearby cypress tree and pull myself up onto a low branch, out of the water. From my perch, I watched the last of the flames die out. The water still glowed blue in places, but fainter now. The water level was noticeably lower. Joseph's sacrifice had worked. The channels were flowing again. I thought about Joseph, hoping his death had been quick. I thought about the infected, humans, wondering if they could ever be saved. And I thought about the thing the mother had put inside me, which I could now feel moving beneath my skin. With shaking hands, I checked the camera on my wrist. It was still working, the memory card intact. I had my evidence. Now, I just needed to survive long enough to share it. Dawn was breaking by the time a search helicopter spotted me. I'd spent the night in the tree, watching the water level drop steadily and the creatures retreat into the deeper channels. The thing inside me had grown. I could feel it wrapped around my left arm, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. When the rescue team pulled me into the helicopter, I tried to warn them, not to touch my arm, but my voice was weak from dehydration and shock. I must have passed out, because the next thing I remember was waking up in a quarantine tent, with people in hazmat suits moving around me. "She's infected," one of them was saying. "Like the others we found. The parasite is changing her blood." Chemistry. I wanted to tell them everything. About Joseph, about the mother, about the thousands of eggs ready to hatch and spread. I wanted to show them my camera with its evidence, but my mouth wouldn't work right. My thoughts were becoming cloudy. Part of me, a growing part, didn't want to tell them anything. Didn't want to stop what was happening. That part thought the creatures were beautiful, necessary, the rightful inheritors of Earth. I fought against those thoughts. They weren't mine. They belonged to the thing inside me. "The camera," I finally managed to whisper when one of the suited figures came close. "Check my camera." They found it still strapped to my wrist. I watched as they downloaded the images, heard their shocked exclamations as they saw what I had seen. "My God," someone said. "It's not just here. We're getting reports from connected waterways in 3 states now." "The migration has started," I tried to say, but I'm not sure if the words came out right. They put me on a helicopter again, flying me to a larger facility. Through the window, I could see military vehicles converging on the Everglades. Too late, I thought. Too little? The mother has had thousands of years to plan this. She won't be stopped easily. The thing in my arm pulsed, almost like it was laughing. As we flew over a canal connecting to a major city, I saw the water glowing that now familiar blue. Pale shapes moved beneath the surface, heading toward populated areas. In the canal locks and control stations, people moved with jerky, puppet-like motions, opening the gates to let the water, and what lived in it, flow freely. I should have been terrified. I should have been screaming warnings. Instead, I felt a strange calm spreading through me, along with the cold that had started in my arm and was now reaching my heart. "Beautiful," I heard myself whisper. The person next to me, a doctor, I think, gave me a worried look. They increased my sedation, and the world began to blur. My last clear thought was of Joseph and the stories his people had told for generations, warnings no one had heeded. The long ones who sleep in deep mud until the waters rise. They weren't sleeping anymore. As darkness took me, I felt the presence of the mother in my mind, ancient, patient, and triumphant. The migration had begun, and humanity, like so many, species before it would adapt or perish. Water always wins in the end, and what lives in the water has always been waiting for its time to return. My name is Cassandra Reeves, and if you're hearing this, you need to stay away from the water, all water, because they're coming, and they're hungry, and they've waited so very, very long. My name is Victor Reynolds. I've spent the last 8 years as a ranger here in the Adirondack Mountains. Most people think being a forest ranger must be exciting, but honestly, it's usually pretty quiet. I watch over these woods, help lost hikers, and make sure no one starts a forest fire. But what happened last autumn changed everything I thought I knew about these forests. That day started like any other October afternoon. I was closing up the old fire tower on Eagle Peak for winter. From up there, you could see miles of maple trees painted in reds and golds by the autumn sun. It looked like the whole mountain was on fire, but in the most beautiful way. The air felt crisp in my lungs, cold enough to see my breath, with that perfect autumn smell of wood smoke and dying leaves. I took a moment just to breathe it all in, before heading down the ladder. Max, my German Shepherd, waited patiently at the bottom. "Almost done, buddy," I called down to him. Max had been with me for 6 years now, the most loyal partner a lonely ranger could ask for. As I climbed down, I noticed a hawk circling overhead. It rode the air current so perfectly, barely needing to flap its wings. Nature at its most graceful. That's when I saw something odd. The sunlight was hitting the forest floor through the trees. But instead of the usual dappled patterns, I saw what looked like little rainbows dancing between the leaves. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, shifting and moving. I'd never seen anything like it in all my years as a ranger. I stopped to watch, thinking it must be some rare light refraction. That's when I heard Blackwater Creek nearby change its tune. I know how crazy that sounds, but there's no other way to describe it. The steady bubbling over rocks suddenly shifted rhythm, almost like it was trying to form words. "Max, you hear that?" I asked. His ears perked up, head tilted in that confused dog way. The wind changed direction suddenly, bringing a sickly sweet smell of fruit that had been rotting way too long. Strange for October, most fallen fruit doesn't get that ripe this late in the season before the frost takes it. I reached for my radio to check in with headquarters, a habit at the end of each day. When I turned it on, instead of Helen's usual crisp response, I heard fragments of conversations. Tourists talking about trail markers, someone complaining about blisters, a child asking about bears. The weird part, I recognized those voices. From a tour group I'd guided almost 3 weeks ago. "Helen, you there?" I tried again, but just got more phantom conversations. I switched the radio off and back on. Nothing but static. That's when Max started acting strange. He stood at the edge of a maple grove, hackles raised, refusing to go further. I'd never seen him like that before. Max would chase a bear if I let him, but something about those trees made him pull back on his leash, whining. "What is it, boy?" I patted his side, trying to calm him. I looked more closely at the trees ahead. Last week, I'd marked a new trail through here with bright orange blazes, paint marks on the trunks, but they weren't where I'd left them. Some trees I was certain I'd marked were now bare, while others I knew I hadn't touched now bore bright orange slashes. Most people don't know this about me, but I wasn't always a ranger. Before this, I was Dr. Reynolds, associate professor of botany at Cornell. I left that life behind when my research got too out there for my colleagues. I'd been studying plant communication networks, suggesting that entire forests might function as a kind of collective intelligence. They laughed me out of academia. Now, looking at those moved trail markers, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd been right all along. I absently rubbed my left shoulder, where my birthmark sits, a raised pattern that perfectly matches the mountain ridge visible from my cabin. My grandfather used to say it meant I belonged to these mountains. Now I was starting to wonder if it meant something more. I pulled out my grandfather's compass embedded in my walking stick. 3 generations of Reynolds men had carried it through these woods. The needle spun wildly, settling nowhere. "Let's go home, Max," I said, suddenly eager to be back in my cabin before dark. But fate had other plans for me that day. As I rounded the bend toward the ranger station, I spotted a woman with a professional camera and tripod taking shots of the valley. Not unusual this time of year. The fall colors bring photographers from all over. But something about her made me stop. "Excuse me," I called out. "That area's not on the public trail." She turned, not startled at all, like she'd known I was there. "I have a permit," she said, reaching into her jacket pocket. "Melissa Harding, Wildlife Geographic." I checked her paperwork, all in order for photographing the fall foliage, but something else caught my eye, the edge of a photograph sticking out from her bag. "Mind if I ask what brings a photographer from a major magazine to this specific spot? There are more dramatic views elsewhere." Melissa hesitated, then reached into her bag. "Because of these," she said, handing me a stack of prints. "I took these in this same area last year." The top photo showed a stunning maple grove, nothing unusual, but as I flipped through them, I felt a chill run down my spine. In the background of several images, barely noticeable at first glance, were what looked like figures, human-shaped collections of leaves and branches standing between trees. "Most people tell me it's just pareidolia, seeing faces in random patterns," she said. "But I've photographed nature for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like this, and they're only in the photos from this mountain." I should have told her it was nothing, sent her on her way. That's what the old me, the rational professor, would have done. Instead, I heard myself say, "There's something you should see in my cabin." I led her back to my small ranger home, Max trotting cautiously behind us. Inside, I pulled out my journal, filled with sketches and notes from years of observations. "These trees respond to touch in ways they shouldn't," I explained, showing her drawings of pattern changes in bark after human contact. "And these fungal networks connect trees that should have no biological reason to share resources." For the first time in years, someone was actually listening to me, instead of backing away slowly. "You believe there's something conscious in this forest, don't you?" Melissa asked. I nodded, relieved not to be hiding it. "I think these mountains have been trying to communicate with us for a very long time, and I think, for some reason, they're getting more desperate to be heard." As the sun set outside my cabin window, painting the kitchen in deep amber light, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the thrill of scientific discovery and the terror of what we might find. Melissa and I decided to spend the night in the woods. We needed to see what happened after dark. I packed my backpack with the basics: flashlights, water, some sandwiches, and a first aid kit. Max seemed nervous, pacing around the cabin as we got ready. "He doesn't usually act like this," I told Melissa as I clipped on his leash. "He loves going into the forest." "Animals sense things we can't," she said, checking her camera batteries. "Maybe we should listen to him." But curiosity pushed us forward. We headed out as the sun was setting, planning to camp near where Melissa had taken her strange photos. "Tell me more about these figures you captured," I said as we walked through the dimming forest. The trees creaked around us, their shadows stretching longer than they should have in the fading light. "At first, I thought they were just weird shadow patterns," Melissa explained. "But when I enlarged the prints, I noticed they all had the same basic shape, like people made of leaves and sticks, and they only appear in photos from this part of the forest." She handed me another photo, and I stopped in my tracks. This one showed what looked exactly like a person, but made entirely of autumn leaves and thin branches. It stood between 2 maples, its leaf face turned toward the camera. "This could be faked," I said, though I wasn't really questioning her. "I don't fake my work," she replied simply. "Besides, why would I drive all the way up here if I had?" We kept walking, and I pointed out a cluster of maple trees. "Look at the bark patterns there." Melissa squinted in the fading light. "They look almost like faces." "Watch them for a minute," I said. We stood still, just observing. After about 30 seconds, Melissa gasped. "That one changed. The pattern shifted." I nodded. "I've been documenting this for months. The changes are subtle, but real." The sun was almost gone now. We found a small clearing and set up our simple camp. Just a tarp, sleeping bags, and a small fire pit. As darkness fell completely, the forest seemed to close in around us. "Listen," I whispered after we'd been sitting by the fire for about an hour. All around us, the woods were filled with rustling sounds. Not the normal nighttime forest noises, but something that sounded almost like footsteps, moving from tree to tree. I pointed my flashlight toward the sound. Instantly, everything went quiet. "That's not normal," Melissa whispered. "No, it's not," I agreed. "Turn off your light for a minute." When we sat in darkness, lit only by our small fire, the rustling started again, closer this time. Max growled, low, pressing against my leg. Suddenly, a few leaves fell into our fire. The flames turned bright purple, then green, and the smoke began to form shapes. Not random patterns, but what looked like symbols or letters in a language I'd never seen. "Error. You seeing this?" Melissa asked, her voice shaking a little. Before I could answer, more leaves fell, and the smoke changed again, now forming what looked exactly like a human hand reaching upward. "We should document this," Melissa said, reaching slowly for her camera. But as soon as she moved, the smoke dispersed, returning to normal gray wisps. We didn't sleep much that night. Every time we dozed off, something would wake us. A twig snapping too close to our heads, or Max barking at shadows. By morning, we were exhausted, but too wired to feel it. I got up at first light to check the trail markers I'd placed yesterday. "Melissa," I called. "You need to see this." She hurried over, camera in hand. All my orange blazes had been rearranged overnight. Instead of marking a straight path, they now formed a circular pattern with strange symbols at key points. "I've seen these before," I said, tracing one symbol with my finger. "In books about Algonquin legends. These are warning signs, meant to keep people away from sacred areas." Melissa tried to photograph the symbols, but her camera wouldn't turn on. "That's weird. The battery was full last night." She walked a few yards away and tried again. This time, it worked perfectly. "Try coming back," I suggested. When she returned to the symbols, her camera died again. "There are specific spots where electronics fail," I explained. "I've mapped several of them across the mountain." Back at the ranger station later that morning, I showed Melissa my collection of missing hiker reports. I'd pinned them on a map, creating a pattern I'd been studying for months. "See this?" I pointed to a line running along the mountain at exactly 2,300 feet elevation. Every disappearance in the last 30 years happened along this line. Some were found days later, confused and talking nonsense about walking trees. Others were never found. Melissa studied the map. "My photos were all taken near this line, too." She pulled out her laptop and loaded the pictures she'd taken yesterday. As we scrolled through them, my hands started to shake. In the background of almost every image were the figures, more of them now, and clearer than before. Human shapes made entirely of leaves and sticks, some partially hidden behind trees, others standing in plain view. "They're watching us," Melissa whispered. That afternoon, we hiked to the oldest part of the forest. I'd brought equipment to take core samples from the trees, long, thin cylinders of wood that show growth rings. "Look at this," I said, laying out samples from trees miles apart. "See how the patterns match? These trees grew in exactly the same way, at exactly the same rate, for over 100 years. That shouldn't be possible unless they're connected somehow," Melissa finished. As the sun began to set again, We decided to stay and watch what happened to the trees after dark. We set up a small blind, like a tent with viewing windows, and settled in to observe. The forest grew quiet as darkness fell. Too quiet. No owls, no insects, nothing. There, Melissa pointed, her voice barely audible. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed it. A maple tree at the edge of our vision was slowly, almost imperceptibly, changing position. Its roots were partly lifting from the ground, allowing the entire tree to shift a few inches to the left. "That's impossible," I breathed. But we both knew what we were seeing. More trees began to move, all so slowly that you'd miss it if you weren't watching carefully. And between them, gathering in the spaces, were piles of leaves and branches that hadn't been there before. Then we heard it. The forest was speaking. Not with words, but with sounds that eerily mimicked our own conversations from earlier in the day. "Remember when I asked about your research?" Melissa's voice came from the darkness, except Melissa was right beside me, not speaking. Then my own voice responded from a different direction, repeating exact phrases I'd used hours ago. "They've been listening to us," I whispered, "and learning." Max whimpered and pressed himself flat to the ground. I couldn't blame him. For the first time, I was truly afraid of the forest I'd spent my life studying. The leaf piles were moving now, rising up, taking shape. In the dim moonlight, we could make out what looked like people. People made entirely of forest matter, their movements jerky but purposeful as they assembled themselves into human form. "The autumn people," Melissa breathed. We froze, hardly daring to breathe as we watched the leaf people move through the trees. They didn't walk like humans, more like they flowed, sometimes breaking apart into swirls of leaves before coming back together in human shape. "We need to leave," I whispered to Melissa. "Now." We backed away slowly, keeping our eyes on the forest beings. Max stayed pressed against my leg, trembling. One of the leaf figures turned toward us. It had no real face, just a swirl of red and gold leaves where a face should be. But somehow, I knew it was looking right at us. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Melissa's arm. We crashed through the underbrush, not caring about the noise now. Behind us, the rustling grew louder, like a windstorm, was chasing us through the still night air. When we finally reached my cabin, we slammed the door shut and locked it. Max hid under the table, still shaking. "What were those things?" Melissa gasped, trying to catch her breath. "I don't know," I admitted, "but I think they're what I've been sensing in the forest all these years." We spent the rest of the night comparing notes and theories. Melissa pulled out her great-grandmother's journal, an old leather book with yellowed pages. "I brought this because I remembered something," she said, flipping through the pages. "My great-grandmother lived near here in the 1920s, during the big logging days. She found what she was looking for and read aloud. October 15th, 1923. The men won't go back to the East Ridge. 3 loggers saw walking leaf men in the maple grove. The foreman says it's nonsense, but they quit anyway. Tom says the forest is fighting back." I felt a chill run down my spine. The same things were happening 100 years ago. "During another time when the forest was threatened," Melissa pointed out. The next morning, we cautiously went back out. The forest seemed normal in the daylight, but we both felt eyes watching us from every direction. As we hiked, birds followed us. Not 1 or 2, but dozens, all the same kind of sparrow, moving through the trees in perfect sync, always keeping us in sight. They're watching us through the birds, I realized. The entities are using wildlife as their eyes. Later that day, we found a clearing where mushrooms grew in a perfect circle. I knelt down to examine them. These fungi are all connected. Underground, I explained to Melissa. What you see are just the fruiting bodies, like apples on a tree. The real organism is a network of thin threads running through the soil for miles. A thought struck me. What if the autumn people aren't separate beings at all? What if they're more like hands, Parts of one giant organism that uses the entire forest as its body? As I said this, a strong wind suddenly blew through the clearing, scattering leaves all around us. But there was something strange about it. The wind only affected the clearing where we stood. The surrounding trees remained perfectly still. "I think you just made it angry," Melissa said quietly. That night, something changed. The forest creatures became more aggressive. Twigs snapped outside my cabin windows. Leaves piled against the doors. The wind howled through cracks, sounding almost like words. "I've upset them by figuring out what they are," I told Melissa as we huddled inside. "They've been hiding their nature for centuries, and now they know we've discovered them." We took turns keeping watch through the night. Around 3 a.m. during my shift, I realized something was wrong. "Melissa?" I called out but got no answer. Her sleeping bag was empty. The cabin door was open just a crack, leaves scattered across the threshold. Max was still asleep, which was strange. He would have barked if someone had broken in. I grabbed my flashlight and jacket and ran outside, calling her name. The forest remained silent except for the wind in the trees. I searched all night, growing more desperate with each passing hour. As dawn broke, I found her camera hanging from a branch near where we'd first seen the leaf people, but no sign of Melissa herself. With shaking hands, I checked the camera's memory card. The last photo made my blood run cold. It showed Melissa with her back against a large maple tree, her expression peaceful, almost trance-like. The bark of the tree seemed to be opening behind her, pulling her in. Her body was half absorbed into the trunk, leaves and small branches already growing from her outstretched arms. I ran back to the cabin, my mind racing. If the forest had taken Melissa, maybe it was keeping her alive somehow, like the missing hikers. I had to find a way to communicate with it, not just observe, but actually make contact. That's when I remembered my old research. Years ago, I'd developed a compound from native plants that I believed could temporarily link plant and animal nervous systems. My colleagues had called it dangerous pseudoscience, but I'd always believed it might work. I still had the formula in my old research notes. I gathered the plants I needed, certain mushrooms, bark from specific trees, berries that grew only on this mountain, and worked through the day mixing them in precise amounts. By sunset, I had a dark green liquid that smelled like earth after rain. I knew using it was risky. It might kill me, or worse, trap me in some in-between state. But Melissa was already lost, and this might be my only chance to find her. I took my mixture to the oldest tree I knew of on the mountain, a massive maple that local legends said had been a meeting place for Algonquin councils. Its trunk was wide enough that 5 people holding hands couldn't circle it. "I know you can hear me," I said aloud to the forest. "I know you've been trying to communicate. Well, now I'm ready to listen." I poured my mixture onto the tree's roots and placed my hands against its bark. At first, nothing happened. Then the world began to shift around me. Colors became brighter, sounds sharper. I could feel the wind not just against my skin but flowing through me, as if I had become partly air myself. The tree bark beneath my fingers softened, pulling my hands in slightly. I didn't fight it. I closed my eyes and let myself sink into the wood, trusting that whatever happened next was what needed to happen. My consciousness expanded outward, flowing through the tree and into its roots, then racing along underground. Networks that connected to other trees, to bushes, to every plant in the forest. I felt what the forest felt, ancient, patient, but now increasingly afraid. I saw glimpses of centuries passing in moments. Native Americans treating the trees with reverence, European settlers cutting and burning, modern climate changes bringing new diseases and pests. And I understood something crucial. The autumn people weren't attacking us. They were defending themselves, or preparing for something much worse to come. Deeper and deeper I went into the forest's mind. It felt like falling through layers of time. each one showing me more of the truth. Then suddenly, I saw her. Melissa wasn't dead. She was transformed. She floated in a strange in-between place, her body partly human, partly plant. Her eyes were open but dreamy, like she was having the most peaceful sleep. Around her were others, dozens of people I didn't recognize, probably the missing hikers from over the years. They weren't suffering. They were being preserved, kept safe in a kind of living suspension. Their minds were still active, connected to the forest's vast consciousness. "Melissa," I tried to call out, but I had no voice here, yet somehow she sensed me. Her eyes focused on mine. "Victor." Her voice came directly into my mind. "It's beautiful here. I can feel everything. Every tree, every leaf, every creature. We're all connected." "Why are you keeping these people?" I asked silently. Images flashed through my mind in response. Terrible visions of the forest burning, trees dying from new diseases, the climate changing too fast for adaptation. I saw the autumn people gathering human genetic material, preserving it alongside plant DNA, creating hybrids that could survive what was coming. "They're preparing for disaster," Melissa explained. "They've seen it coming for decades. The forest is going to burn, Victor. Not this year, maybe not for 20 years, but it's coming. They're saving what they can, including us." I felt a presence stronger than the others, the central consciousness of the forest. It pushed a choice into my mind. Stay or go. Join us or leave with your knowledge. I understood the offer. I could become like Melissa, part of this ancient intelligence, preserved against the coming catastrophe. Or I could return to my human life, carrying what I'd learned but separate from the network. "If I go, what about Melissa and the others?" I asked. "They stay. They chose. But you may speak for us. Tell the truth. Some will listen." I thought about my life as a ranger, as a scientist. I'd spent years trying to prove the forest was more than people thought, that plants were more intelligent than we gave them credit for. Now I had the proof. But at what cost? "I can't stay," I decided. Someone needs to warn people. Someone needs to try to prevent the fires, the destruction. I felt sadness from the consciousness, but also understanding. "Then go, but you will carry us with you now. You will never truly be separate again." I felt myself being pushed back, up, through the layers of awareness, back toward my human body. The last thing I saw was Melissa's peaceful face as she merged further with the living wood around her. I woke up lying on the forest floor, the great maple tree towering above me. My hands were stained green from the mixture I'd made, but they were free from the bark. Max sat beside me, licking my face anxiously. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I'm back." But I wasn't entirely back. Something had changed in me. I could feel the trees around me in a way I never had before, sense the movement of nutrients through their trunks, the slow pulse of their existence. I tried to stand, but couldn't. My legs felt like they were made of rubber. I managed to get my radio out and call for help, but when I tried to explain where I was, all that came out was, "The forest that walks. They're preparing. The autumn people." The search team found me a day later, half-conscious and babbling about trees that moved and people made of leaves. They put me on a stretcher and rushed me to the hospital, where doctors said I was suffering from hypothermia and possible poisoning from whatever plant mixture I'd consumed. No one believed my story about Melissa. They found her camera with the strange photo, but experts said it was just a double exposure or camera malfunction. When they couldn't find her body, they added her name to the list of hikers lost in these mountains. The doctors ran tests on me for weeks. My blood work came back with results that made no scientific sense. Plant compounds were integrated into my cells, changing my DNA in ways that baffled medical experts. They wrote papers about my case, calling it a new kind of plant toxin exposure. They kept me in the hospital for almost a month. When they finally released me, I went straight back to my cabin. Max was overjoyed to see me. A ranger friend had been taking care of him. I tried to tell my story to anyone who would listen: the Forest Service, university researchers, even journalists. Most thought I was crazy. A few were curious enough to investigate. But the Autumn people never revealed themselves again, at least not in the same way. They were being more careful now. I kept working as a ranger, watching over the forest that had changed me forever. Over the next few years, I developed a system to monitor the subtle changes in the woods, patterns only I could recognize now. I documented everything, building evidence of the communication network that connected the entire mountain ecosystem. And I warned about the fires. I showed climate models, drought patterns, bark beetle infestations moving north, all pointing to increased fire risk in the coming decades. Some officials listened and improved fire prevention measures. Others dismissed me as an eccentric old ranger. 5 years after my encounter with the Autumn people, the first signs appeared. The worst drought in recorded history hit our region. Trees that had stood for centuries began to die. I knew what was coming. When the lightning storm hit that dry August night, fires exploded across 3 counties. The blaze that firefighters had long feared finally arrived, racing through the Adirondacks with unstoppable fury. I didn't evacuate with the others. Instead, I hiked to the heart of the forest, to the grove where I'd last seen Melissa. Max followed, me faithfully, never leaving my side despite the smoke and heat. As flames approached from the valley below, I placed my hand on the great maple tree, feeling its ancient bark beneath my fingers. "I'm here," I said simply. "I've come back." The bark softened under my touch, just as it had years before. This time, I didn't resist. I stepped forward, letting myself merge with the tree. Max whined once, then pressed against my leg as we both disappeared into the living wood. The fire raged for weeks, destroying thousands of acres of forest. My cabin burned to the ground. The authorities listed me as another casualty of the disaster, my body presumably lost to the flames. But I wasn't lost. I was transformed, finally accepting what I had resisted years before. I joined Melissa and the others in the vast consciousness of the forest, our human awareness adding to the ancient intelligence of the ecosystem. And when the fires finally died out, something remarkable happened. New growth emerged from the blackened ground faster than any forest recovery ever recorded. Seedlings that should have taken years to establish sprouted in weeks. Plants thought to be extinct in the region suddenly thrived. Scientists came from around the world to study the miracle forest that regrew after the devastating fire. Some noticed unusual patterns in the new growth, the way certain trees seemed to protect vulnerable species, how nutrients flowed in ways that defied conventional understanding of forest succession. A few even reported strange sightings at dusk, figures that seemed made of leaves and branches moving between trees when no wind was blowing. Children claimed they heard the forest whisper stories if they sat quietly enough. Most dismissed these as campfire tales, but some, those who really listened, began to understand what I had learned, that the forest is more than just a collection of trees. It's a single, vast organism with a plan and purpose of its own. And sometimes, if you visit the Adirondacks in late October, when the leaves are at their most brilliant red and gold, and you stand very still at twilight, you might catch a glimpse of us, the Autumn people, walking between worlds, guardians of an ancient intelligence that has learned to adapt and survive by merging the best of humanity with the enduring wisdom of the forest. We're still here, watching, waiting, preparing, and if you listen closely enough, you might hear us calling to you through the rustling of fallen leaves. My name is Paul Donovan. I've been a ranger at Rocky Mountain National Park for almost 15 years now. People call me the winter expert around here. At 41, I'm not as quick as I used to be, especially with my bad leg, but nobody knows these mountains and the snow better than me. It was early December when everything changed. The kind of perfect winter day that makes you forget how dangerous these mountains can be. The sun was bright, making the snow look like it was covered in tiny diamonds. I was doing my usual patrol, trudging through knee-deep snow that crunched under my snowshoes with every step. The air was so cold it made my nose sting when I breathed in. My breath came out in little white clouds that disappeared into the blue sky. The tall pine trees stood like quiet guards all around me. Everything was peaceful. Too peaceful, maybe? I've always loved how quiet winter can be in the park. Usually, you just hear the soft sound of snow falling from tree branches or the distant call of birds. But today felt different. The silence felt heavy, like the mountains were holding their breath, waiting for something. As I made my way along the trail, I spotted some elk tracks crossing the path. I've tracked animals for years, so I know all their patterns. But these tracks were strange. They just stopped suddenly in the middle of the trail. It looked like the elk had been lifted straight up into the air. No more footprints, no signs. Of a struggle, nothing. I knelt down to take a closer look. That's when I noticed how quickly the temperature was dropping. The sun hadn't even started to set behind the mountain ridge yet, but my thermometer showed the temperature had fallen. 20 degrees in just minutes. That's not normal. Not even close. The wind picked up, bringing a smell like the air after lightning strikes. But there was something else mixed in. A musty animal smell I didn't recognize. Not elk, not bear, not anything native to these mountains. I reached for my radio to call it in, but instead of the usual static, I heard voices. Not talking to me, but to each other. They were discussing coordinates and something about containment procedures. I tried to respond, but they couldn't hear me. The voices faded away, leaving just static. That's when I noticed the shadows. They were wrong. The shadow of a pine tree moved seconds after the tree itself had stopped swaying in the wind. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was seeing things, but it happened again with my own shadow. I moved my arm, and my shadow followed. A moment later, like it was catching up, I pulled out my special thermometer, the fancy one the university research team gave me to study weird weather patterns in the park. The readings made no sense. Patches of air that were 30 below zero right next to spots that were just below freezing. No gradual change, just hard lines between extreme cold and normal cold. The sun was getting lower now, casting long shadows across the snow. Just ahead, I spotted something that made me stop in my tracks. A perfect circle about 15 feet across where the snow had completely melted. Around it was 3 feet of snow, but inside the circle was bare ground, not even wet, just dry dirt and pine needles. I stepped toward it carefully, my bad leg aching more than usual. As a ranger, I've seen strange things in these mountains. Freak storms, weird animal behavior, but nothing like this. I didn't know it then, but this circle was just the beginning. Something had come to my mountains, something that didn't belong here, and it knew I was watching. I stood at the edge of that perfect circle, the wind suddenly dead still, and felt the certainty wash over me. I was no longer the only hunter in these woods. I should tell you a bit more about myself. Before I became a ranger, I was an Olympic biathlete. That's cross-country skiing plus rifle shooting. I was pretty good too, until the accident. My left leg got badly hurt in a skiing crash. Doctors put it back together with metal pins and lots of surgery, but it was never the same. My Olympic days were over, but I found a new home in these mountains. The cold always makes my bad leg hurt worse. As I stood there looking at that perfect circle of melted snow, the pain grew sharper. like my leg was trying to warn me about something. I took some photos of the circle and marked the spot on my map. The sun was getting low, and I needed to make camp before dark. In winter, night comes fast in the mountains, and the temperature drops even faster. I found a good spot under some thick pines where the snow wasn't as deep. As I set up my small tent, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Years of tracking mountain lions and bears have given me a kind of sixth sense. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Something was out there, watching me. Built a small fire and heated up some beans and coffee. The flames pushed back the darkness, but not the feeling of eyes on me. I pulled out my journal and sketched the strange circle I'd found, along with some weird ice formations I'd seen earlier in the week. They looked more like buildings than anything nature would make, all sharp angles and perfect shapes. That's when I heard the crunch of snowshoes approaching my camp. I reached for my rifle, pointing it toward the sound. "Identify yourself," I called out. "Don't shoot. I'm Dr. Martin Weiss, geological researcher," a voice called back. A man stepped into the circle of firelight. He was about my age, with a beard covered in frost and glasses that kept fogging up in the cold. He carried a heavy backpack full of scientific equipment. "Sorry to startle you, Ranger," he said, catching his breath. "My equipment failed about 2 miles back and I saw your fire. I was hoping I could warm up before I freeze to death out here." I lowered my rifle and waved him over. "Come sit by the fire. I've got extra coffee." Dr. Weiss dropped his pack and practically fell onto the log beside me. His hands shook as he took the cup of coffee I offered. "What kind of research brings you out here in December?" I asked. Most scientists avoided the park in winter. He took a long sip before answering. "I'm studying radiation signatures, unusual ones that have been appearing in this area every winter since 1952. My ears perked. Up at that. "Radiation. Is it dangerous?" "Not exactly radiation like from a nuclear plant," he explained. "More like, well, have you ever seen the Northern Lights?" I nodded. "It's similar to that, but it shouldn't be happening here, and it follows patterns that suggest it's not natural." He looked at me carefully. "But that's supposed to be classified. I probably shouldn't be telling you." "I've seen some strange things today," I said slowly. I showed him my journal with the sketches. His eyes grew wide as he flipped through the pages. "These ice formations, they match some of the patterns we've detected." He looked up at me. "You've actually seen these?" I nodded. "Been reporting them for years. The park administration thinks I'm going crazy. They've got my reassignment letter ready, just waiting for me to sign it." For the first time in years, someone was taking my observations seriously. I told him about the circle of melted snow, the strange tracks, the voices on my radio. "Tomorrow, I want you to show me everything," Dr. Weiss said, excitement in his voice despite his exhaustion. That night, as we both tried to sleep, the temperature dropped even more. My thermometer read 30 below zero. But inside our little camp, it felt like the air was charged with electricity, like right before a lightning storm. "Ranger Donovan," Weiss whispered from his sleeping bag. "Does it usually get this cold? Here?" "No," I answered. "And call me Paul." "Paul," he said. "I think we're being watched." "I know," I replied. "I felt it all day." Outside our tent, something moved through the snow. Not walking on it, but through it, like a fish through water. The only sound was that high-pitched ringing just at the edge of hearing. Neither of us slept much that night. Morning came with a strange, milky light filtering through the clouds. After a quick breakfast, Dr. Weiss and I packed up camp and headed toward the area where I'd seen the strange tracks and the melted circle. "I've been studying these mountains for 20 years, I told him as we trudged through the snow. "Never seen anything like what's happening now." Weiss nodded, his breath making clouds in the freezing air. "The government has been aware of anomalies in this region since the early 1950s. but nobody's been able to explain them. Why didn't they tell the park rangers? I asked, feeling a bit angry that I'd been kept in the dark. They classified everything, he explained. Thought it might cause panic. But after your reports kept coming in, my research team convinced them we needed to investigate. We reached the circle I'd found yesterday. It was still there, perfectly round, with no snow inside despite the light dusting that had fallen overnight. Weiss pulled out a small device that looked like a Geiger counter. Interesting, he muttered as it clicked rapidly. These readings suggest a pattern, not random decay. What does that mean? I asked. It means whatever made this circle did it on purpose. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. We continued hiking, following a route where my compass started acting strangely, spinning wildly before pointing in a direction that definitely wasn't north. There's a glacier about half a mile this way, I said, pointing toward a wall of ice in the distance. It's been there since the last ice age. As we approached the glacier, I noticed something odd about its surface. There were marks on it. Not natural cracks, but what looked like tool marks. "Dr. Weiss," I called, "take a look at this." He hurried over, his snowshoes crunching loudly. Those look like steps. Sure enough, carved into the ice wall were rough steps leading down into darkness. They were too precise to be natural, too well made to be from hikers or climbers. "Should we go down?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Weiss nodded, his eyes shining with excitement behind his fogged-up glasses. I took the lead, testing each step with my good leg before putting my full weight on it. The steps descended about 30 feet into the glacier, opening into a large chamber that shouldn't have been possible. The walls were smooth, like they had been polished, and the ceiling rose at least 15 feet above us. "This isn't natural," I whispered, my voice echoing slightly in the ice cave. "No," Weiss agreed, running his hand along one smooth wall. "This was made. By who? When? That's the question, isn't it?" We explored deeper into the glacier, finding more chambers connected by carved tunnels. In one room, the ice floor had been perfectly leveled, and there were markings etched into the walls, symbols I'd never seen before. "Can you read these?" I asked Weiss. He shook his head. "They don't match any known language or scientific notation." I pulled out my radio to call for backup, but all I got was static and those same strange voices from yesterday. Only now they sounded clearer. November, Sierra. 1-4, containment breach confirmed. Temporal displacement detected. "What does that mean?" I asked Weiss. "Temporal displacement?" Before he could answer, his radiation detector began clicking wildly. He checked the readings, and his face went pale. "We need to leave. Now." As we hurried back toward the entrance, I noticed something half buried in the ice wall. I stopped to brush away the frost. "Paul, we need to go," Weiss called from ahead. "Just a second," I said, clearing more ice. What I uncovered made no sense. A metal box with Cyrillic writing and a date, 1970. "Weiss," I called, "this is Russian equipment. From 1970. He rushed back to look. "That's impossible. It's 1965. We stared at each other, the reality sinking in. Either someone was playing an elaborate hoax, or... "Time isn't working right here," Weiss whispered. We grabbed the box and hurried, out of the ice caves. The sun was setting already, though it felt like we'd only been inside for an hour. As darkness fell, something strange happened in the sky above us. Lights like the aurora borealis began to dance, but they moved with purpose, swirling and forming patterns. I flashed my flashlight at one of the lights, 3 quick blinks. To my shock, the lights responded with the same pattern. "They're intelligent." Weiss breathed. We made camp on higher ground, where we could see the patterns forming across the snowfield below us. Perfect geometric shapes appeared in the snow. Circles, triangles, and complex patterns that couldn't have formed naturally. Weiss's radiation detector continued to click, showing spikes in a regular rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. "Do you have a camera?" he asked. I nodded and pulled out my old Kodak. We took several photos of the lights and patterns in the snow. That night, neither of us could sleep. The temperature fluctuated wildly, freezing 1 minute, almost warm the next. And always that high-pitched ringing just at the edge of hearing. "Whatever it is," I said quietly, "I think it knows we're here, and I think it's studying us." "Just like we're studying it," Weiss replied. The forest around us had gone completely silent. No wind in the trees, no nocturnal animals moving through the underbrush. Just silence and that faint ringing. "Tomorrow," Weiss said, "we might meet whatever's causing all this." I nodded, knowing he was right. The thought should have terrified me, but instead, I felt a strange calm. After years of being dismissed as crazy, I was about to be proven right. Something was in these mountains. Something not from here. And it was watching us. I woke up to the strange feeling of being watched. The tent was cold. Colder than it should have been even in December. My breath made thick clouds in the air. Next to me, Weiss was already awake, staring at the ceiling of the tent. "It's midnight," he whispered. "Something's out there." I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent. The moment I looked outside, I knew our world had changed forever. The clearing was bathed in a soft blue light. Snow drifted down, but it didn't fall naturally. It swirled in perfect spirals, defying gravity. And there, in the center of our camp, was, well, I still don't have the right words for it. It looked a bit like an elk in its general shape, but that's where any similarity to anything normal ended. Its body was see-through, like it was made of ice or crystal. Inside it, lights danced like tiny stars. Its legs were too long, bending at odd angles. Instead of a head with antlers, it had something more like an insect's head, with multiple eyes that glowed blue. When it moved, it left trails of light in the air. The snow around it formed into perfect shapes: cubes, pyramids, spheres, rising up and then dissolving. Weiss gasped beside me. "Beautiful," he whispered. The creature turned toward us, those glowing eyes fixing on our faces. I felt the air temperature drop at least 20 degrees in seconds. My bad leg seized up with pain so intense I nearly fell. "Don't move," I warned. Weiss. It might see sudden movements as a threat, the crystal being tilted its insect-like head. Then, to my shock, it created a perfect ice sculpture of me right next to it, down to my ranger hat and the scar on my cheek. "It's studying us," Weiss whispered, "trying to understand." The creature raised what might have been an arm. A pulse of energy shot out, not at us but at the trees behind us. The pulse left a perfectly circular mark in the snow, just like the one I'd found earlier. "It's showing us it made those circles," I said. Weiss nodded, his scientific mind working even in this impossible situation. "It can control temperature with incredible precision. That's why we've been getting those weird readings." As if to prove his point, the air around us suddenly warmed. The snow at our feet melted in a perfect circle around us, while just inches away it remained frozen solid. The creature moved closer, its crystalline body making a sound like wind chimes as it walked. Up close, I could see that what I thought was its body was actually some kind of advanced technology, a suit or vessel of some kind. "It's not biological," Weiss whispered. "I think it's a machine, some kind of probe or research device." "From where?" I asked, though I already knew the answer wasn't going to be Russia or any other place on Earth. The creature stopped about 10 feet from us. Then it did something I'll never forget as long as I live. It created a perfect model of our solar system in the air in front of us, made of ice and light. Then it pointed to a star I didn't recognize, far outside our solar system. "It's telling us where it's from," Weiss said, his voice filled with wonder. The model vanished, and the creature projected something else. Images in the air of what looked like a government facility built into a mountainside. I recognized the area. It was only about 5 miles from where we stood. "I've never seen that building," I said. "It was classified," Weiss replied. "Built in the 50s for research into unusual phenomena. Officially abandoned after what they called a containment failure." "You knew about this?" I asked, feeling a flare of anger. "Only rumors. But I think our friend here is showing us that it wasn't abandoned." He pointed to the image where lights were visible in some of the windows. "Someone's still there." The creature suddenly went still. The images disappeared, and it turned its head toward the north. Something had caught its attention. Without warning, it moved, not walking but gliding over the snow, heading away from our camp. "We should follow it," Weiss said, already grabbing his pack. "Are you crazy?" I asked. "That thing isn't from Earth." "Exactly why we need to learn more," he replied. "This could be the most important scientific discovery in human history." I couldn't argue with that. We quickly packed essential gear and followed the tracks, though they weren't normal tracks. Instead of footprints, the snow was altered in a line of perfect geometric patterns. We followed for about an hour, my leg screaming in pain the whole time. The creature moved fast, sometimes waiting for us to catch up before continuing. Eventually, we came to a small valley I'd never seen before, despite all my years in these mountains. In the center was what looked like an excavation site. The snow had been removed to reveal metal doors built into the mountainside. "Another government facility?" I asked. Weiss shook his head. "I don't think so. Look at the design of those doors." They weren't like any doors I'd seen. The metal had strange patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them too long, and there were no visible handles or keypads. The crystal creature approached the doors, which opened silently at its presence. It turned back to us, those blue eyes seeming to invite us inside. "We shouldn't," I said, even as I took a step forward. "We have to," Weiss replied. Inside was a large chamber that didn't look built so much as grown. The walls curved organically, covered in the same shifting patterns as the door, and inside were more of the crystal beings, 3 of them, working at what looked like control panels made of light. They turned as we entered. I felt my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. One of the creatures approached us. It raised a crystalline arm and I felt a sudden pain in my head. Images flooded my mind. Stars, planets, vast distances. I saw their home, a world of crystal and light. I saw their journey here, which had taken centuries. And I saw their purpose. They weren't invaders. They were researchers, like Weiss. They had been studying Earth for decades, collecting samples, learning our languages, observing our development. The pain subsided, and I found myself on my knees, Weiss beside me in a similar state. "They showed you too?" I gasped. He nodded, his face pale. "They're scientific researchers, just like us." But then I saw something that chilled me to the bone. In the back of the chamber were what looked like glass cases, and inside some of them were perfectly preserved human bodies. Men in old-fashioned hiking gear. A woman in what looked like military uniform and several empty cases. "They're collecting specimens," I whispered, "and I think they want to add us to their collection. We need to get out of here," I whispered to Weiss, trying not to make sudden movements. "Now." Weiss nodded slightly, his eyes never leaving the glass cases with the frozen people inside. "There's an old fire lookout tower about 3 miles east of here," he whispered back. "It has a powerful radio. We could call for help." I remembered the tower. It had been abandoned years ago when the Park Service built a newer one closer to headquarters, but the old equipment might still work. The crystal beings seemed distracted, focused on their control panels of light. The one that had shown us the images moved back toward its companions, making those wind chime sounds again. "On 3, I said quietly, "we back up slowly toward the door. 1, 2, 3. We began inching backward. The beings didn't seem to notice at first. We made it halfway to the door when one of them turned suddenly, its blue eyes fixing on us. The temperature in the room plummeted. My bad leg seized up, and I stumbled. The being glided toward us, raising one of its crystal arms. "Run!" I shouted, pushing Weiss toward the door. We burst outside into the snowy night, running as fast as we could through the deep snow. Behind us, the metal doors slid open and blue light spilled out. The beings were following us. "We'll never outrun them," Weiss gasped as we struggled through a snowdrift. I pulled out my map, checking our position by flashlight. "This way," I said, pointing toward a narrow canyon. "It'll be harder for them to follow us through there." We pushed on, the cold burning our lungs with every breath. Behind us, those strange lights moved through the trees, casting eerie blue shadows on the snow. The canyon was exactly where I remembered. A narrow split in the mountainside barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. We forced our way in, the rock walls scraping our shoulders. "Do you think they can follow us here?" Weiss asked, his breath coming in painful gasps. His question was answered by a strange sound ahead of us, like ice cracking. The canyon walls were freezing over, ice spreading like living things along the rock. "They're trying to trap us," I realized. We pushed forward faster, the walls growing narrower. Just as the ice was about to close in completely, we burst out, the other side into a small clearing. The fire lookout tower stood on a ridge about half a mile away, silhouetted against the night sky. "There it is," I said, pointing. "We just need to—" I was cut off by a pulse of energy that shot past my head, freezing a tree solid instantly. The crystal beings had found another way around. "I'll distract them," Weiss said suddenly, pulling a small device from his pack. "My radiation detector. I can reverse it, make it emit a signal instead of just receiving. It might confuse them long enough for you to reach the tower." "What?" "No," I protested. "We stay together." "Paul," he said, firmly, "one of us needs to call for help. Your leg is bad. You won't be able to outrun them if they chase both of us. I can buy you time." Before I could argue further, he pressed the device into my hands. "Take this. If you can modify the radio in the tower to broadcast at this frequency." He showed me a number scribbled on a piece of paper. "It might disrupt their systems temporarily." He turned and started running toward the beings, waving his arms. "Hey, over here!" The crystal creatures turned toward him, those eerie blue eyes tracking his movement. I wanted to go after him, but I knew he was right. One of us had to reach that tower. I ran as fast as my bad leg would allow, not looking back even when I heard Weiss cry out. The snow was deep, and each step felt like wading through cement. But the tower grew closer, and finally, I reached its base. The wooden stairs creaked dangerously as I climbed. Years of harsh mountain winters had weakened them, and several steps broke under my weight. But I made it to the top and forced open the door to the small observation room. The equipment inside was old but looked intact. A heavy radio set sat on a desk covered in dust. I brushed it off and tried the power switch. Nothing happened. "Come on," I muttered, checking the connections. The tower had its own generator. I found the manual starter and yanked it hard several times until the engine sputtered to life. I tried the radio again. This time, lights flickered on and static hissed from the speaker. I began adjusting dials, trying to find an emergency frequency. Out the window, I could see flashes of blue light in the forest. The beings had Weiss. I tried not to think about what they might be doing to him. I finally found a frequency that seemed to be working and grabbed the microphone. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Ranger Paul Donovan at Rocky Mountain National Park. Emergency. Situation. Need immediate military assistance." To my surprise, a voice answered almost immediately. "This is Mountain Base. We read you, Ranger Donovan. What is your situation?" I started to explain, but a sudden cold filled the tower. One of the crystal beings had followed me. It drifted through the door, those blue eyes fixed on me. With shaking hands, I grabbed Weiss's radiation device and the radio. Following his instructions, I connected them and adjusted the frequency to the number he'd given me. The being moved closer, reaching out with a crystalline arm. The air around me grew so cold I could hardly breathe. Ice formed on my eyelashes and in my nose. With the last of my strength, I pressed the transmit button. A high-pitched whine filled the air. The effect on the being was immediate. Its body seemed to vibrate, the lights inside it flickering wildly. It made a sound like shattering glass and retreated slightly. Emboldened, I increased the power. The being's form began to lose cohesion, the crystal structure breaking apart. But then, something unexpected happened. It reached out and touched my head. In that moment, our minds connected again. But this time, I wasn't just receiving images. It was learning from me, too. I felt it rifling through my memories, my thoughts, my fears. And I saw more of its world, its purpose. These beings weren't just collecting specimens. They were trying to understand life on Earth because their own world was dying. They needed to find a new home, and Earth was one possibility. They weren't evil. They were desperate. The connection broke as the being pulled away, its form now unstable. It drifted back through the door and down the stairs. Through the window, I saw more flashes of blue light, and then a blinding white flash that lit up the entire valley. When my vision cleared, I saw helicopters approaching, searchlights sweeping the forest below. The military had arrived. I tried to stand, to go look for Weiss, but the cold and exhaustion finally caught up with me. I collapsed onto the floor of the lookout tower, the world going dark around me. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Men in dark suits stood around me asking questions I barely understood. They wanted to know about the anomalies, about the beings, about what I'd seen. I told them everything, including what had happened to Weiss. They exchanged glances when I mentioned his name. Dr. Weiss's body was recovered, one of them finally said, perfectly preserved in ice. No signs of injury. The beings? I asked. No evidence was found of any entities, another man said carefully. The official report will state that you and Dr. Weiss were caught in an avalanche. Exposure to extreme cold caused hallucinations. But that's not what happened, I protested. The man handed me a folder. Inside was a single document, my reassignment letter. Sign this, and you'll be transferred to Yellowstone. A fresh start, or don't sign, and we'll have to reconsider your fitness for duty anywhere. I thought about arguing, about telling them they were making a mistake, but I could see in their eyes that they already knew the truth. They just didn't want anyone else to know. I signed the paper. They never found the facility in the mountainside. The maps I drew led nowhere. The photos I took showed nothing but trees and snow. Even my journal entries seemed changed somehow. The detailed sketches replaced with rough doodles that could have been anything. But I know what I saw. And sometimes on cold winter nights, I still feel like I'm being watched. My leg aches with a pain that's not quite natural. And occasionally, my radio picks up strange voices discussing coordinates and containment procedures. Whatever came to those mountains in the winter of 1965 is still out there, still watching, still learning, and someday they'll come back. My name is Douglas Walsh. I've spent most of my life watching over the sea from towers of stone and steel, guiding ships safely through treacherous waters. But what happened at Acadia Point changed everything I thought I knew about the world, and what lies beneath our oceans. The October winds howled like wounded animals as I secured the iron shutters of the lighthouse. Waves crashed against the jagged rocks below, sending spray so high it misted across the windows even though the lighthouse stood over 100 feet above the shoreline. I could taste salt on my lips every time I took a breath. The gulls were quiet. That bothered me more than the storm itself. gulls usually scream and fight even in the worst weather, but today they huddled silently in the rocky crevices as if hiding from something worse than the gale. I watched the ancient pines bending. At angles that seemed impossible, they curved like rubber, not wood, yet somehow didn't snap. I'd weathered many storms in my years as a lighthouse keeper, but something about this one felt wrong. The rules seemed different here, like the normal laws of nature didn't quite apply. With the shutters secured, I returned to the logbook, flipping through the entries from Jensen, the previous keeper. His neat handwriting grew increasingly erratic in his final weeks. The last entry simply read, "It knows I see it." After that, nothing. The Coast Guard found the lighthouse empty when they came to check. No sign of Jensen, not even footprints leading away. Just an empty tower and those final disturbing words. I adjusted the great lens and started the rotation. The powerful beam cut through the dense fog banks that surrounded us. What struck me as odd was how the fog stayed perfectly in place despite the howling wind. It should have been torn to shreds by these gusts, but instead, it hung there like a wall. I turned on the maritime weather radio, expecting emergency alerts about the massive storm battering us. But the calm voice simply reported clear conditions throughout the region, with light winds from the northeast. I looked out at waves that had to be 30 feet high slamming against the rocks and wondered if I was losing my mind. Something compelled me to check the tide. What I saw made my stomach drop. The water had pulled back dramatically, exposing sections of shoreline I'd never seen in my 6 months at this post. Strange rock formations jutted from the newly revealed seabed, arranged in patterns too regular to be natural. The barometer on the wall caught my attention when the glass suddenly cracked. A perfect line right down the middle. Before it broke, the needle had been spinning in complete circles, which is simply impossible. I grabbed the telescope and scanned the horizon. For a moment, I thought I saw ships out there, their shapes distinctive against the gray sky. I rushed to the signal lamp to warn them away from the dangerous shoreline, but when I looked again, they had vanished completely. Back in my quarters, I piled more logs onto the already roaring fire. It made no difference. The room remained so cold I could see my breath. Frost formed on the inside walls, creating intricate patterns that reminded me of something I once saw in the Arctic, a place I'm not supposed to talk about. I touched my right ear, or what's left of it. The Navy calls the frostbite that took half of it an unfortunate training accident. The truth is buried in classified reports of an expedition that officially never happened. What we found there? No, that's a story for another time. I pulled out the tarnished pocket watch I always carry. The sailors who recovered it from a 19th century shipwreck thought it was just a curiosity. They didn't notice how sometimes the hands move backward, counting down to something only the watch knows. At 53, I'm considered old for this job, but my reputation got me here. When other keepers refuse a posting, they send Walsh. The last choice for lighthouses others fear. I never minded. After what I've seen at sea, very little frightens me anymore. That night, as the storm raged on with unnatural persistence, my radio crackled to life. The voice that came through wasn't the automated weather service, but a woman, clear and precise despite the static. Acadia Point Lighthouse, this is Lieutenant Rebecca Frost, Coast Guard Special Operations. Do you copy? I grabbed the handset, surprised to hear another human voice after weeks of isolation. This is Walsh at Acadia Point. I copy. Mr. Walsh, I've been assigned to establish emergency communications with your station. All regular channels have gone silent, and we're receiving unusual readings from your location. I laughed, a hollow sound even to my own ears. That's one way to put it, Lieutenant. I've got a storm that doesn't exist, fog that doesn't move, and a tide that's gone out but won't come back in. There was a long pause before she responded. Mr. Walsh, what I'm about to tell you is classified. There's a pattern of navigational, Anomalies in your region dating back centuries. Ships report temporal distortions, losing days, even weeks. Some disappear entirely. I stared out at the impossible storm, suddenly understanding why the regional superintendent had called me the only man for this particular post. I had been chosen for this lighthouse, just like I had been chosen for that Arctic expedition, because someone knew what I had seen before and believed I could handle seeing it again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee that went cold too fast and wrote down everything strange I'd seen in my night log. The bioluminescent creatures in the water caught my eye the most. Bright, blue-green things that moved in perfect circles and matched no fish or jellyfish I'd ever seen in my decades at sea. When dawn came, it didn't really get light. The sky turned from black to a dull gray, like someone had thrown a blanket over the sun. The storm kept on, same as before. I was writing down the morning measurements when the radio crackled again. "Walsh? You there?" Lieutenant Frost's voice came through. "Clearer today. Still here," I said, "though I'm starting to wonder for how long. I've been looking into your situation. Your request for transfer 6 months ago, it was denied pretty fast, wasn't it?" I frowned. "How did you know about that?" "I've been reading your file. The superintendent's note said you were the only man for this particular post." "What do you think he meant by that?" I looked out at the waves that shouldn't be there according to the weather service. "I think someone knows more about this lighthouse than they're telling us." "Exactly," Frost said, excitement creeping into her voice. "Listen, Walsh, most people report these things and get ignored or transferred for psychological evaluation. But your observations are detailed, consistent, and match historical patterns. I need to know everything you're seeing. It had been years since anyone took my reports seriously. Usually they'd just nod and file them away, probably with a note saying, 'Old Walsh and his sea stories again.' But Frost was different. She actually believed me. 'The fog has shapes in it,' I told her. 'When I look straight at it, it's just fog. But from the corner of my eye, I can see structures, like buildings or monuments, but they disappear when I try to look right at them.' 'Can you draw what you see?' she asked. 'I'll try,' I said, though I'm no artist. We talked for hours. Me, describing the impossible things around the lighthouse, her asking smart questions that showed she knew more than she was saying. For the first time in years, I didn't feel crazy. 'Walsh, I need to come to the lighthouse,' she finally said. 'These readings we're getting. Something big is happening there. Something important. The boats can't get through in this storm.' I told her, 'I'll find a way,' she said. 'Keep the light burning.' After we signed off, I decided to really search the lighthouse. If there were answers, they'd be here somewhere. The building was older than it looked, parts of it dating back to the 1830s. I started in the basement, where the walls were raw stone against the bedrock. The salt water that had always seeped in during storms was doing something impossible, flowing upward along the walls against gravity. It left trails that formed symbols I'd never seen before, like someone was trying to write messages in a language I couldn't read. Behind an old supply cabinet, I found a loose stone in the wall. When I pulled it out, there was a small space behind. It, just big enough to hold a stack of leather-bound books, journals. The oldest one dated back to 1834. I took them upstairs and laid them out on the table. Opening the first one made my hands shake. The keeper from 1834 described watching the tide pull back to reveal strange rock formations. He wrote about fog that stayed in place despite strong winds, about a feeling of being watched by something. In the water, I moved to a journal from 1879, same things. Then 1912, same again. 1954, no change. Every keeper had seen what I was seeing now, every single one. The storm grew stronger as night fell again. The shutters rattled so hard I thought they might tear off, but I hardly noticed. I was lost. The journals, reading by lamplight as keeper after keeper described their slow realization that something was out there. watching the lighthouse. A thunderous boom shook the whole tower. At first, I thought it was just the storm, but then I heard it again, followed by a voice calling my name. I grabbed my raincoat and flashlight and hurried down the spiral stairs to the main door. When I pulled it open, Lieutenant Rebecca Frost stood there, drenched and windblown, but somehow looking completely in control. "Told you I'd find a way," she said, pushing past me into the entryway. She shrugged off a heavy backpack and ran a hand through her short, dark hair. "Coast Guard helicopter dropped me half a mile back. Nearly crashed twice getting here. Was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, with sharp eyes that took in everything about the lighthouse entryway in seconds. You found something," she said, noticing the journal in my hand. It wasn't a question. I nodded. "You better come upstairs. There's a lot to show you." As we climbed the stairs, the lighthouse beam cut through the darkness above us, sending strange shadows dancing across the walls. For a second, I thought I saw something huge move across the beam outside, something that didn't belong in the sky. "Walsh," Frost said quietly, "what do you know about why this lighthouse was really built?" I stopped climbing and turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" "Lighthouses warn ships away from dangerous shores," she said. "But some were built to contain things that were already here, things that were better left alone." The whole lighthouse seemed to groan around us, as if the structure itself was responding to her words. "I think," I said slowly, "we need to talk about what's really happening at Acadia Point." I showed Frost the journals I'd found hidden in the wall. We spread them across the kitchen table while the storm raged outside. The beam from the lighthouse swept over us every few seconds, making the pages glow and then darken in a steady rhythm. "Look at these dates," I said, pointing to entries that describe the same strange events. 1834, 1879, 1912, 1954, and now. The same things happen every time. Frost flipped through one of the journals, her face serious. "It's on a cycle. Something wakes up, causes all these strange events, and then goes quiet again." "But what is it?" I asked. She looked up at me. "That's what we need to find out." We spent hours going through the journals, making notes of the patterns. The tide pulling back too far, the fog that stayed put despite the wind, the cold that nothing could warm, the strange creatures in the water. "Walsh," Frost said suddenly, "your compass. Where is it?" I pulled it from my pocket. The needle was spinning wildly, never stopping on north. "That's not just magnetic interference," she said. "Something is actively disrupting it." A huge wave crashed against the rocks below, shaking the whole lighthouse. A shelf fell off the wall, tools and supplies crashing to the floor. Among them, my old sonar device from my Navy days clattered across the stone. "It's broken," I told her as she picked it up. "Has been for years." But when she switched it on, the screen lit up, showing a circle of dots surrounding the lighthouse. Dozens of them, all moving slowly toward us. "That's not possible," I whispered. "That thing hasn't worked since the Arctic," she finished for me. She saw my surprise and added, "Your file is very detailed, Walsh. I know about the expedition." I touched my half-missing ear without thinking. "Then you know why I left the Navy." She nodded. "You saw something. Something they wanted to forget." Looked at the sonar screen again. "Those contacts, they're all around us." We both jumped as a loud bang came from downstairs like something heavy had hit the main door. Then another bang and another. "Let's go see what we're dealing with," Frost said, checking her sidearm. We headed down the spiral staircase, flashlights cutting through the shadows. The banging had stopped, but now we could hear a slow, steady dripping. When we reached the main door, we found it still locked and secure. But seawater was seeping in around the edges, dripping onto the floor. Except it wasn't dripping down. The drops were moving sideways, forming a small puddle that was slowly taking shape. "Don't touch it," Frost warned, though I had no intention of doing so. The water formed a rough circle on the floor, then started to ripple as if something was disturbing it from beneath. Shapes appeared in the ripples, the same strange symbols I'd seen in the basement. "It's trying to communicate," Frost murmured. We backed away, returning upstairs to the kitchen. The journals were still spread across the table, but now they were open to different pages than we'd left them on, as if someone, or something, had been reading them while we were gone. "Walsh," Frost said quietly, "I need to tell you why I'm really here." She pulled a thick file from her bag and laid it on the table. Inside were old maps, photographs, and documents marked with Coast Guard and Navy SEALs. "This lighthouse wasn't built here by accident," she said. "The first one was constructed in 1834, right after local fishermen reported something massive washing up on shore during a storm." She showed me a faded sketch of what looked like a giant squid or octopus, but with features that made no sense, parts that looked almost human. They thought it was dead, but it wasn't. It was just waiting. When people started going missing, they built the lighthouse. The light and foghorn seemed to keep it contained somehow. I looked at the sketch again. "I've seen something like this before. In the Arctic." Frost nodded. "We think they're connected. The thing in the Arctic and whatever's here, they might be the same kind of creature." "That's why I was sent here," I said slowly. "Because I've seen one before, and survived," she added. Another massive wave hit the lighthouse, and this time we heard glass breaking somewhere above us. "The lantern room," I said, and we both ran for the stairs. We climbed quickly to the top of the lighthouse where the great lens and light were housed. One of the windows had shattered, letting in the storm. Rain and sea spray soaked everything, and the powerful light was flickering dangerously. As I moved to secure the backup power, Frost went to the broken window. She stopped suddenly, her flashlight beam fixed on something outside. "Walsh," she called, her voice tight. "You need to see this." I joined her at the window and looked out. The tide had pulled back even further, exposing more of the seabed than I'd ever seen. The strange rock formations were fully visible now, and in the sweeping beam of the lighthouse I could see they weren't natural rocks at all. They were ruins, ancient stone structures covered in barnacles and sea growth, but clearly made by human hands, or something like them. "Those aren't on any map," Frost whispered. As we watched, the water between the ruins began to glow with an eerie blue-green light. The bioluminescent creatures I'd seen before were gathering, forming patterns that matched the symbols from the water puddle and the basement walls. "It's beautiful," Frost said, leaning further out the broken window. I grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Lieutenant, we need to fix this window and get the light running properly again." She blinked as if coming out of a trance. "You're right. Sorry." We found boards and tools and covered the broken window as best we could. I got the light working steadily again, its beam cutting through the storm. As we finished, Frost's radio crackled to life. A voice came through, but it wasn't the Coast Guard. It was a man's voice using old-fashioned formal language, sending a distress call in Morse code. Frost checked the frequency. "This is impossible," she said. "This is from the Elizabeth Dane. She sank in 1890. We listened as the voice described a massive shape rising from the water, wrapping around the ship's hull and pulling it down. "That's not a recording," I said slowly. "That's happening right now." Frost looked at me with wide eyes. "How can that be?" I didn't have an answer, but I was starting to form a theory. "Time isn't working right here. The journals, the radio signals from ships lost decades ago, my watch running backwards sometimes. Something is disturbing time itself," she finished, "for me." We went back downstairs to get something to eat and plan our next move. As we reached the kitchen, I noticed water seeping under the door that led to the outside observation deck. Frost saw it too and drew her gun. I picked up a heavy flashlight and we approached the door together. When I pulled it open, we found the deck covered in barnacles. Not just a few, the entire deck was encrusted with them, forming perfect geometric patterns across the stone. They hadn't been there that morning. "They're growing too fast," I said. "This isn't natural." Frost knelt to examine them, then suddenly grabbed my arm. "Walsh, look at the tide." I looked out at the dark water. The tide hadn't come back in. According to my watch, it had been out for nearly 27 hours straight. No tide on Earth stays out that long. "It's getting ready for something," I said. "Whatever's out there, it's preparing." As if in answer, the fog shifted, and for a brief moment, I saw the structures in it clearly. Massive columns and archways, like an ancient city floating in the air. "Did you see that?" I asked Frost. She nodded slowly. "I think it's showing us what used to be here, before the ocean covered it." We went back inside, both of us feeling the weight of what we were discovering. This wasn't just a haunted lighthouse or a strange natural phenomenon. Something ancient and powerful was here. Something that could bend the rules of reality itself. "We need to figure out what it wants," Frost said as we closed the door on the barnacle-covered deck. "And how to stop it," I added, not entirely sure we could. The next morning, if you could call it morning with how dark the sky remained, Frost and I decided to check the newly exposed shoreline. We bundled up against the cold and made our way down the narrow path that zigzagged from the lighthouse to the rocks below. The wind was still fierce, pushing against us like it didn't want us to reach the shore. The waves had pulled back so far that I could see parts of the seabed that should have been under 50 feet of water. "Look there," Frost pointed to something half buried in the sand. We approached carefully. It was the wooden hull of an old ship, broken but still recognizable. Frost brushed away some sand and found a nameplate. Elizabeth Dane, 1890. "The ship from the radio last night," I said, my mouth going dry. "The one that sank over 100 years ago." "It shouldn't be here," Frost said. "This wreck was supposedly found 20 miles offshore." We dug around the wreck and found a waterproof box still intact. Inside was a captain's logbook, the pages damp but readable. I opened it to the last entry, dated October 17th, 1890. "The fog surrounds us," I read aloud. "Navigator says we're miles from shore, but I can see Acadia Lighthouse clear as day. Something moved beneath us just now, large enough to rock the ship. The men are frightened. I fear we won't see morning." I turned the page and felt my blood run cold. The next entry was dated October 17th, 2025. Today's date, written in the same handwriting. "We are still here," it read. "Still dying, still watching the lighthouse. The keeper sees us now. It's happening again." I showed Frost, whose face had gone pale. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "Time isn't working right here," I said again. "Whatever's out there, it's trapping things. People, ships, maybe even years themselves." A low rumble came from deeper out on the exposed seabed. We both turned to look. "We should go back," I said, but Frost was already moving forward toward a large, dark shape in the distance. "Lieutenant," I called, hurrying after her. "It's not safe. We need to see it, Walsh," she called back. "We need to know what we're dealing with." I caught up with her as we reached the edge of a deep trench that hadn't been visible from the lighthouse. The water inside it was black and still, untouched by the storm winds. "There's something down there," Frost said, shining her flashlight into the darkness. The light caught something moving, something massive and translucent, like a giant jellyfish or squid, but with features that made no sense. Parts of it looked almost human, with limbs that ended in too many joints and shapes that seemed to change as we watched. "Walsh," Frost said quietly, "is this what you saw in the Arctic?" I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "Yes, but smaller. This one is much bigger." The creature moved again, rising slightly in the trench water. As it did, my watch started spinning backward rapidly, and Frost's digital watch flashed random numbers. "It's manipulating time," she said, "creating bubbles where time runs differently." We backed away slowly, neither of us wanting to turn our backs on the thing in the trench. As we retreated, I felt something change in the air pressure. My ears popped painfully. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Frost's arm. We sprinted back toward the lighthouse as a wave of energy pulsed outward from the trench. The ground beneath our feet shuddered, and behind us, seawater began rushing back in faster than any natural tide. We barely made it to the lighthouse steps before the water covered the path we'd just been on. Inside, we slammed the door shut and leaned against it, catching our breath. "It knows we saw it," I panted. "It's been watching us the whole time," Frost said. "Through the fog, through the water seeping in, it's been trying to communicate." We climbed back up to the main level, and I immediately noticed something different. The room felt warmer than before, almost comfortable compared to the bone-deep cold we'd been dealing with. Frost noticed it too. "It's trying to make us let our guard down," she said. "Don't trust anything." As if in response to her words, a strange humming sound filled the lighthouse. Not mechanical, more like someone singing from very far away. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Frost nodded. "It's in my head somehow, like it's bypassing my ears completely." The humming gradually shaped itself into words. Broken English in a voice that felt ancient and alien. Keepers, watch, contain. The words came in fragments, as if the thing was struggling to form human language. Long. Wait. Home. Beneath. "It's talking to us," Frost whispered. "Or through us," I added, feeling a pressure building inside my skull. The voice grew stronger. Came. Meteor. Drawn. Buried deeper. Waiting. Frost grabbed one of the journals and started flipping through it frantically. "Here," she said, pointing to a page. "October 1834. Strange rock from the heavens fell into the sea. Men from Boston came to study it. They built the lighthouse where it landed." Another pulse shook the lighthouse, and this time I clearly saw the foghorn vibrate strangely, as if fighting against the pulse. "The foghorn," I said suddenly. "And the light. Look how the creature stays back from the light beam." Frost's eyes widened with understanding. "The lighthouse isn't just warning ships away from the rocks. It's keeping that thing contained. The light and horn create some kind of field that it can't cross." The voice in our heads grew angry, the pressure becoming painful. "Freedom. Time. Surface." I staggered to the wall, pressing my hands against my temples. Frost didn't look much better, her face tight with pain. "The creature arrived in a meteor," she said through gritted teeth. "But it came here for a reason. It was drawn to something already buried here. Something deeper," I agreed, remembering the voice's words. The pressure suddenly released and we both gasped with relief. The voice was gone, but in the silence that followed I heard something worse. The foghorn was making strange, stuttering sounds like it was breaking down. We rushed to check the machinery. One of the main pipes had cracked, the metal twisted as if something had crushed it from inside. "We need to fix it," I said, already grabbing tools. "If the foghorn fails—" "The containment field drops," Frost finished, as we worked to repair. The pipe, the lighthouse windows rattled with another massive wave. Through the glass I could see the fog pressing closer than ever before, thick tendrils of it reaching toward the lighthouse like fingers. "It's testing the boundaries," I said. Frost nodded grimly. "And it's getting stronger." We managed to patch the foghorn pipe with spare parts, and the steady, low tone resumed, pushing back the reaching tendrils of fog. As we finished, Frost suddenly stumbled, grabbing the wall for support. "Are you okay?" I asked. She nodded, but her eyes looked strange, the pupils too large, reflecting the lighthouse beam in an unnatural way. "Just tired," she said. "We should check the light mechanism next." As we climbed toward the lantern room, I kept glancing at Frost. Something about her movements seemed off, slightly too smooth, as if she was moving underwater. "The creature communicates through the water," I said carefully. Through the fog, through the puddles in the lighthouse, even the water in our bodies. Frost turned to look at me, her face expressionless. What are you trying to say, Walsh? I'm saying we need to be careful, I replied. It might try to influence us, make us do things to help it escape. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You're being paranoid. Let's just fix the light. N.E. The lantern room. I watched as Frost examined the great lens that focused the lighthouse beam. Her fingers trailed over the glass in patterns that matched the symbols we'd seen in the water. Beautiful craftsmanship, she murmured, but so fragile. One good hit and it would shatter completely. I moved to stand between her and the lens. Lieutenant, I think we should go back downstairs, get some rest. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something move behind them, something that wasn't human. Of course, she said smoothly. You go ahead, I'll be right down. I didn't move. Together, her smile faded. You know, don't you? I know something's wrong, I said carefully, and I know we need to keep this lighthouse functioning. She laughed, a sound too hollow to be natural. The lighthouse is a prison, Walsh. A cage built by men who feared what they didn't understand. Lieutenant, it just wants to go home, she continued, her voice changing slightly, gaining harmonics that made my teeth ache. Is that so wrong? To want to return home after being trapped for centuries? I backed toward the stairs, never taking my eyes off her. Whatever's influencing you, Frost, you need to fight it. She tilted her head at an impossible angle. Oh, Walsh. If only you could see what it's shown me. The places beyond our stars. The beauty in the deep. As she spoke, frost, actual ice crystals, began forming on the walls around us, spreading rapidly across the glass of the lantern room. I turned and ran down the spiral stairs, hearing her footsteps following too quickly behind me. The thing wearing Lieutenant Frost's face was coming, and I knew I had to find a way to save us both, before the lighthouse fell and released whatever waited in the depths below. I ran down the spiral staircase, my footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Behind me, Frost was moving too fast, taking the steps 3 at a time with unnatural grace. Walsh, she called, her voice now a strange mix of her own and something deeper. Don't you want to understand? To see what I've seen? I reached the main level and slammed the heavy door shut behind me, throwing the bolt just as she hit the other side. The whole door shuddered from the impact. You can't keep me out, she said, her voice seeping through the cracks like water. This body knows all the access codes, all the security protocols. I backed away from the door. She was right, the lighthouse had several entrances, and as a Coast Guard officer, she'd have access to all of them. I needed a plan. The journals. Maybe they held some answer about how previous keepers had dealt with this situation. I grabbed as many as I could carry and retreated to the lantern room at the top of the lighthouse. It was the most defensible position with only one way in and out, and most importantly, it housed the light itself. As I barricaded myself inside, I could hear Frost methodically checking each level of the lighthouse below. Occasionally, something would crash or break as she systematically destroyed equipment. The foghorn stuttered and then went silent. She'd found the machinery and disabled it. Without the foghorn, half of our protection was gone. I looked out at the fog pressing closer to the lighthouse, no longer held back by the sound. I frantically paged through the journals, looking for anything that might help. My eyes caught on an entry from 1912. Found hidden compartment behind. The lens housing. Contains special prisms and metal fragments from the fallen star. Previous keeper wrote they focus the light to create a barrier the creature cannot cross. I turned to examine the giant lens. It was an intricate piece of equipment, with dozens of glass panels arranged to focus the light into a powerful beam. Behind it, I found a small metal plate that didn't match the rest. When I pressed it, a hidden compartment slid open. Inside were strange, crystal-like prisms unlike any I'd seen before. They had an odd weight to them and seemed to vibrate slightly in my hand. Alongside them were metallic fragments that looked like meteorite pieces, with unusual patterns etched into their surface. Below me, I heard the main door to the lantern room being unlocked. Frost was coming. Working quickly, I placed the prisms in specific positions around the main lens, following a diagram I found sketched in the journal. Each prism changed the quality of the light passing through it, adding layers to the beam that weren't visible to the human eye but clearly affected the creature. As the door began to open, I placed the final prism and switched the light to its highest setting. The beam that shot out was different now. It had a strange, pulsing quality to it, and where it touched the fog, the mist recoiled as if in pain. Frost stepped into the room, but stopped at the threshold. Her body was different now. Her skin had a translucent quality, and her movements were fluid, almost boneless. Behind her eyes, I could see something else looking out. "What have you done?" she asked, her voice layered with inhuman tones. "Created a stronger barrier," I said, positioning myself behind the light mechanism. "The same one they used in 1912, and probably every other time your friend out there tried to escape," she hissed, a sound no human throat should make. "This prison cannot hold us forever. The star metal weakens with each cycle. Soon, nothing will contain us." "Us?" I asked. "So you're not just controlling her, you're becoming part of her." Frost's body moved forward but stopped again when the enhanced light touched her skin. Where the beam hit, her flesh seemed to ripple, showing the creature underneath. "We offer knowledge, Walsh," she said. "The secrets of the deep. The truth about the stars, the things your government found in the Arctic and hid from the world." A chill ran through me. "How do you know about that?" "We are connected, all of us who fell from the stars. What you found frozen in the ice is kin to what waits below." The entire lighthouse shuddered as something massive struck its foundation. Through the windows I could see the ocean churning, the exposed seabed now completely covered again as the tide rushed in with impossible speed. "It's coming," Frost said, smiling with too many teeth. "And when it reaches the surface, it will call to what lies deeper, and your world will change forever." I needed to keep her talking while I figured out what to do. "Why here? Why this spot?" Her head tilted at an impossible angle. "Because this is where one of us first fell, eons ago. Deep beneath the ocean floor, our elder sleeps. We came to wake it." Another violent tremor shook the lighthouse, and I heard stone cracking somewhere below us. The foundation was beginning to fail. "Even if you destroy this lighthouse," I said, "there will be others who come after, who build new prisons." "Not this time," she said. "We've learned from each failure. This time, we will be free." As she spoke, I noticed something important. When she stood directly in the path of the enhanced light beam, the influence on her seemed to weaken. Her eyes would clear momentarily, and her movements became more human. If I could focus the full power of the light on her for long enough, maybe I could drive the creature out. I needed to get her directly in front of the main beam. Looking around, I spotted the meteorite fragments I hadn't yet used. According to the journal, they resonated at frequencies painful to the entity. "You know what these are?" I asked, holding up one of the fragments. Frost's body recoiled slightly. "Poison. Dead matter. Part of your friend that didn't survive the fall," I guessed. "Let's see how it likes a reunion." I threw one of the fragments at her feet. It made a high-pitched sound on impact like crystal ringing, and Frost's body convulsed, momentarily stunned. Using that distraction, I adjusted the lens to focus the enhanced beam directly on her. The light hit her full force, and she screamed, a sound that contained both Frost's human voice and something ancient and alien beneath it. Where the light touched her skin, it began to ripple and separate as if the creature was being pulled out of her. She fell to her knees, her body caught between dimensions, part of her still human, part of her becoming something else entirely. Help. Me. Frost's real voice broke through, her eyes clear for a moment. I maintained the light's position, keeping it focused on her as the creature fought to remain inside her body. "Fight it, Lieutenant! Push it out!" Another massive impact hit the lighthouse, and this time I heard the terrible sound of stone giving way. The entire structure tilted slightly as part of the foundation collapsed into the sea. The light wavered as the generator struggled to maintain power. I had minutes at most before we lost electricity completely. Frost was on all fours now, her body contorting as the creature was partially pulled out of her by the light. A translucent shape hovered around her, connected but separate, like a second skin trying to peel away. "The meteorites," she gasped, her voice her own again, "make a circle." Understanding what she meant, I quickly placed the remaining meteorite fragments in a circle around her. Each one began to hum when placed, creating a barrier of sound that seemed to trap the creature as it was pulled from her body. The light flickered dangerously as another section of the lighthouse crumbled. We were running out of time. "Walsh," Frost said, her voice stronger now as more of the creature was forced out. "The final journal entry, from 1954, tells how to send it back." I grabbed the 1954 journal and flipped to the last pages. There, I found instructions for focusing all the lighthouse's remaining power into one concentrated beam, using the meteorite fragments to amplify it. As the creature was fully separated from Frost, hovering above her like a translucent shadow, I began the process of rerouting all power to the light. The rest of the lighthouse went dark as I channeled everything into one final, desperate attempt. Frost lay weakened but conscious within the circle of meteorite fragments. "Hurry," she whispered. "It's almost free." The creature, now fully visible, was a shifting mass of tentacles and limbs that never quite settled on one form. It reached for the windows, trying to escape and join its larger kin outside. With a final prayer to whatever might be listening, I threw the switch. The beam that shot out was blinding. Pure white light focused through the ancient prisms and amplified by the meteorite circle. It caught the creature fully, freezing it in place as an unearthly shriek filled the room. The light held it for one heartbeat, 2, 3, and then the creature began to fold in on itself, compressing into a smaller and smaller point until, with a sound like thunder, it vanished completely. The lighthouse gave another violent shudder, and I knew we had only moments before the whole structure collapsed into the sea. I helped Frost to her feet. "Can you walk?" She nodded weakly. "Get us out of here." Together, we stumbled down the spiral staircase as the lighthouse continued to break apart around us. The walls were cracking, stones falling all around us as we made our way to the main doctor. Outside, the storm was subsiding, the unnatural fog retreating back out to sea. In the distance, I could see the massive form of the creature being forced back into its underwater trench by the final light pulse, its tentacles thrashing in anger as it descended. We barely made it to solid ground before the lighthouse's foundation gave way completely, the entire structure collapsing in on itself and sliding into the churning waters below. As we watched from a safe distance, Frost leaned heavily on my shoulder. "It's not over," she said quietly. "It's just gone back to sleep. For now." I nodded, knowing she was right. The creature was contained again, but not destroyed. And somewhere deep beneath the ocean floor, something even older and more powerful was still waiting. "How long do we have?" I asked. She looked out at the now calm sea. "Decades, if we're lucky, but it will try again. And we'll be ready," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. As the sun finally broke through the clouds for the first time in days, I could see Coast Guard helicopters approaching in the distance. Help was coming, but I wondered what I would tell them. What could I possibly say about what we'd seen? About what still waited beneath the waves? 3 days later, I sat in a sterile conference room at Coast Guard headquarters in Portland. My hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Outside the windows, normal life went on. People walked dogs, drove cars, and worried about ordinary things. None of them knew how close they'd come to something unimaginable. The door opened, and a gray-haired man in a crisp uniform with too many medals entered. Captain James Miller, Regional Superintendent. The man who had personally assigned me to Acadia Point. "Mr. Walsh," he said, not offering to shake hands. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone who watched a lighthouse collapse into the ocean," I replied. "How's Lieutenant Frost?" Miller sat across from me. "Recovering, physically at least. The doctors say she's suffering from hypothermia and exhaustion. Mentally," he trailed off. "She remembers everything," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded once. Unfortunately, the door opened again, and 2 more men entered. They wore plain dark suits but carried themselves like military. Without introducing themselves, they sat on either side of Miller. "Mr. Walsh," Miller continued, "I need your official statement about what happened at Acadia Point." I looked from him to the unnamed men and back. "You mean you need a story you can tell the public?" Miller didn't smile. "I need your statement." I leaned forward. You knew what was out there when you sent me." A flicker of something crossed his face. Guilt, maybe. "We suspected. The cycle is predictable if you know what to look for. Every 40, 50 years the anomalies return. And you sent me because of the Arctic," I said flatly. "Because I'd seen one before." "Because you survived seeing one before," Miller corrected. "Most don't." My hand went to my half-missing ear. "The thing at Acadia, it said there are more. That what we found in the Arctic was connected somehow." The men in suits exchanged glances but remained silent. "Mr. Walsh," Miller said, his voice softer now, "I need a statement that won't cause panic. Something we can tell the public about why a historic lighthouse suddenly collapsed." I stared at him. "You want me to lie?" "I want you to help us keep people safe," he countered. "What good would the truth do? Who would even believe it?" He was right, and I knew it. Who would believe what Frost and I had seen? Who would accept that ancient beings from beyond the stars were hiding in our oceans, waiting to awaken something even older and more terrible buried deep below? "Structural failure," I said finally. "The storm damaged the foundation, and the whole thing gave way. I'll sign whatever you put in front of me." Miller nodded, clearly relieved. "Thank you." "On one condition," I added, "I want to see Frost." The men in suits shifted uncomfortably, but Miller held up a hand to silence their objections. 5 minutes, he said. "Then we need your signature on the official report." They led me down a quiet hallway to a private room in what looked like a medical wing. Frost was sitting up in bed, staring out the window. She looked smaller somehow, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, but when she turned and saw me, her gaze was clear and sharp. "Walsh," she said as the door closed behind me. "I wasn't sure they'd let you see me." I moved to her bedside. "How much do you remember?" "Everything," she said quietly. Being pushed aside in my own body, watching myself try to destroy the lighthouse, feeling its thoughts inside my head. She shuddered. "It's still there sometimes, in my dreams. Calling." "Have you told them everything?" I asked. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "What do you think?" I glanced at the door, lowering my voice. "They want me to sign off on a story about structural failure. Nothing about what was really out there." "Of course they do," she said, "just like they covered up what you found in the Arctic. Just like they've been covering these things up for centuries." I sat on the edge of her bed. "Frost. What do we do with what we know?" She was quiet for a long moment. "I've been asking myself the same question." She reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a small notebook. "I've been writing everything down, every detail while it's still fresh. They'll take it from you, I warned. Not if it's not here, she said, pressing the notebook into my hands. Get this somewhere safe, somewhere they won't look. I slipped it into my jacket. What good will it do? No one would believe us anyway. Maybe not now, she admitted, but someday someone might need to know what we learned about the light frequency that drives them back, about the meteorite fragments that weaken them, about the cycle. The cycle, I repeated. 40 to 50 years, Miller said. Frost nodded. I did the math. The next awakening should be around 2073. We'll be long gone by then, I said. But others won't be, she replied. Someone will need to know what to do when it wakes again, when it tries once more to reach whatever's buried deeper. A knock at the door told me my 5 minutes were up. What will you do now? Frost asked as I stood. Miller mentioned they're transferring me to another lighthouse, further up the coast. Her eyes widened slightly. Did he say which one? Pemaquid Point, I told her. Says they've been having some unusual problems there. Something like understanding passed between us. This wasn't over. Not for me, not for her, and certainly not for the things waiting in the deep. Be careful, Walsh, she said as I turned to leave. And keep the light burning. I nodded. You too, Lieutenant. Back in the conference room, I signed the papers they put in front of me. A story about structural damage, dangerous storms, and a heroic Coast Guard officer who risked her life to save a lighthouse keeper before the whole thing collapsed. Not a word about ancient beings from the stars. Nothing about time distortions, or ships lost between moments. Certainly nothing about what might still be waiting deep beneath the ocean floor. 3 weeks later, I arrived at Pemaquid Point Lighthouse. It was older than Acadia, built in 1827. As I climbed the spiral stairs to what would be my home for, however long they needed me here, I found myself checking the walls for hidden compartments, looking for old journals, wondering what secrets this lighthouse was also keeping. My first night, as I started the light rotating, I noticed how the beam cut through a strange patch of fog that hadn't been there an hour before, how the fog seemed to hold its position despite the wind. I took out my logbook and made my first entry. October 27th, 2025. Arrived at Pemaquid Point. Weather clear, except for unusual fog bank northeast of Lighthouse. Tide patterns normal so far. We'll continue to monitor. Then, I took out Frost's notebook and my own notes from Acadia, hiding them behind a loose stone I'd discovered in the wall of my new quarters. I don't know if anyone will ever read these words. I don't know if anyone would believe them if they did. But the knowledge needs to survive. The truth about what's out there, waiting in the deep places. The truth about the lighthouses built to contain them. And most importantly, what to do when they inevitably try to wake again. As I write this final entry, I can see strange lights moving in the fog offshore. The barometer is dropping faster than should be possible. The cycle continues. I am Douglas Walsh, lighthouse keeper, and I will keep the light burning.